Chapter 673. The Suez Canal meandered through the barren land. Along both sides of the canal was a 104-kilometer-long, 8-kilometer-wide military base. Since 1875, when the Egyptian government had to sell 44% of the Suez Canal's shares to Britain at a low price, Britain's largest overseas garrison was stationed here. In order to protect the interests of the canal, Britain maintained its largest overseas military base here. In the future, during World War II, Britain would use this as its core. At most, there would be 15 divisions of land, 65 air squadrons, and the entire Royal Navy of the Eastern Mediterranean stationed here. It was the headquarters of Britain's operations in the East. The flag of the International Suez Canal Company fluttered everywhere on the canal. The annual revenue from crossing the river was several times the national income of Egypt, and its strategic significance was unimaginably great. In fact, it had become a country within a country of Britain in Egypt. It was also one of Britain's most important overseas interests. Its importance could completely trigger a world war. Britain had so many troops stationed here, and the system was so strict that even with the infiltration ability of Horus's eye, it was difficult to completely control the entire military base. Since the International Suez Canal Company sent a delegation to the military base yesterday, the new British High Commissioner in Egypt, Baron Fumoy, took over all the security and military police systems of the base. He sealed off the armory and oil depots, and kept a tight watch on the ammunition. All the firearms of the garrison were less useful than a broken fire stick. The soldiers from Britain took over most of the important positions, and the military base was in a state of panic. However, Baron Fumoy's methods were superb. First, he used pay as an excuse to dull the soldiers' resistance. On the other hand, he used inspection as an excuse to force the soldiers to accept military management. At noon the next day, he cut off the communication between the soldiers and searched the huge military base one by one. "Baron, the army is ready," a clerk wearing a wig said to a short noble. Baron Fumoy slowly turned back. He had a pair of amber eyes and looked quite young. However, it had to be said that he maintained himself well, so he still looked like a young man. Baron Fumoy's temperament was slightly feminine, and his every move was worthy of being a noble. He was the kind of person who integrated etiquette and manners into his bones. He was the true foundation of Britain's old imperial power. Even if Chun Ong was here, he had to admit that this kind of person was the representative of the true elites of this space-time. Ever since the British Industrial Revolution, the country's power had risen. It had colonized the entire world for hundreds of years, usurped countless elites from all over the world, and accumulated a rich heritage and talent. The Great Voyage era had left the British aristocrats with the ruthlessness and greed in their bones, the pride and sharpening of an empire where the sun never sets, and the vision and accumulation of colonizing the entire world. In this era, although the British were slightly weakened after the First World War, their bones were not destroyed by the Second World War, and they still had the geographical aura to dominate the world. On the one hand, London's extravagance and ostentatious decadence were indicative of the twilight of the empire where the sun never sets. On the other hand, politicians and elites like Baron Fumoy were indicative of the empire's heritage. It was them who used all kinds of political tricks and arrangements to push the United States out of the League of Nations. It was also them who blocked the claws of the United States that reached out to the empire, leading to the peak of North American isolationism. It was also them who reversed the tide of colonial revolts set off during the First World War, using clever and vicious methods to train the disobedient colonies. Behind Baron Fumoy stood an old priest in a red robe. His half-closed eyes made him look like an old man, but only the guards who followed Baron Fumoy knew how terrifying the influence of this ordinary-looking old man was. As the Archbishop of York of the Puritan Church of England, this old man had the same authority as the Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the Anglican Church of England, Church of England. The old bishop nodded slightly to Baron Fumoy and said, The intelligence is correct. There is indeed the scent of those dark creatures here. We have already locked on to most of them. The infiltration of those vampires into the Empire's army has reached a very dangerous level. Baron Fermoy seemed to be angered by this. He said in a deep voice, "If the Queen did not send me here, would we have lost control of this place? How bad would the situation have gotten? We can already confirm that a vampire organization called the Eye of Horus has infiltrated the army and even has a strong influence on Egypt. Fortunately, we have already taken control of the situation before it got worse. Those vampires' control over the army has not reached a critical point yet. Now that we have successfully taken over most of the power here and separated them, we have the situation under control. Next, the matters of screening and handling will be handled by the church." Hearing this, the old bishop smiled and nodded slightly, indicating his approval. "As for us, we will take over the reorganization of the Suez Canal Company and focus on the Eye of Horus," Baron Fermoy ordered. His subordinate, Sir Edmund, reported, "Then should we start the operation now?" Baron Fermoy shook his head. "Look at the sky, it is midnight. Do you want us to clean up a group of vampires that are almost impossible to kill under the moon at midnight? Even an idiot knows that they will be at their weakest tomorrow at noon." "Sir, you mean to say that we will start the operation tomorrow at noon?" Sir Edmund asked carefully. "I said that even an idiot knows." "Are you an idiot? Don't those vampires know that they are at their weakest at noon? Won't they be on guard because of this?" Baron Fermoy mocked. Seeing Sir Edmund's confused look, he helplessly tidied up his appearance and ordered, "We will start the operation tomorrow morning. When the sun is completely in the sky, we will start. At that time, the vampires will not be as vigilant as they are at noon, nor will they be as sharp as when the sun is out. They will fall into a period of psychological dullness." "Yes, sir." Sir Edmund hurriedly lowered his head. The camp of tens of thousands of soldiers would not be crammed together. In fact, it was a very large area. The different areas were divided in an orderly manner, and the army was stationed in different areas according to the battalion level. The regiments were even further apart. The entire military base was like a sparsely distributed city, which made it easier for Baron Fermoy to lock down the area. The checkpoints between the camps had already been taken over by the local army, and the gendarmerie was also under his control. Now, he could cut off the communication between the battalions at any time and gradually clean them up. In fact, that was what he was doing. Dozens of black-robed clergymen had already followed the cardinal to the various camps in the central area of the base. In name, they were there to pray for the soldiers. This was very common in the British Army, and there was nothing to criticize. Just like that, the chains silently tightened around the throats of the Eye of Horus vampires. Chapter 674. Chen Ong took out a small box from the waist of the insect, which contained the investments of other samsara teams. Listening carefully, you can hear the rustling sound coming from inside. Chen Ong smiled slightly. This thing was a surprise. He didn't expect that the samsara travelers would bring such a thing, which greatly advanced his plan. He didn't plan to attack the United Kingdom so soon. He opened the box and found a strange golden insect inside. It was shaped like a snail, pure gold, with 3 rows of buttons and a walkie-talkie on the top of the shell. It looked very strange. This creature is a strange creature in the world of One Piece that can communicate with electromagnetic waves. Den Den Mushi. The pair of Den Den Mushi handed over by the samsara travelers are divided into 2 colors, gold and silver. It is a special breed specially cultivated by the Marines to issue exorcism orders. It has a special status in the world of One Piece. Of course, in other worlds it is too impractical. This kind of creature worth tens of thousands of reward points can be completely replaced by a satellite phone that can be exchanged with a few points. The golden Den Den Mushi is more precious than the ordinary Den Den Mushi. The call is hidden and the communication frequency is very special. Only the corresponding den mushi can receive it, and the communication mileage is powerful. It can almost cross the whole world without worrying about signal problems. But in modern society, it can be solved by digital encryption of long-wave signals, and the cost does not exceed 5 reward points. Therefore, this is the idle resource in the hands of the samsara travelers. It is extremely difficult to trade it, but the value is very precious. The samsara travelers who kept it also gave it to Chun-Ong for capital operation because it was too weak. It seems that Chun-Ong is at a great disadvantage, but is this really the case? Chun-Ong doesn't think so. On the contrary, he values this gain very much. Because den mushi is a creature. The precious thing about creatures is that it is a rich information bank in science and excellent raw materials. These special creatures may have great potential after biochemical transformation. Therefore, den mushi quickly became an important project in Chun-Ang's laboratory. Den mushi, like normal carbon-based organisms, need to drink, eat, and even get sick. Chun-Ong quickly used this characteristic to isolate its relevant genes from the silver den mushi using retroviruses. Using genomics and functional research methods, he found the genes related to the electromagnetic waves emitted by den mushi cells. The reason why the den mushi has the ability to communicate remotely is that there is a functional cell in its cells that has an extremely powerful electromagnetic interference ability. The evolution of this unique cell in the biological world gives it the basic ability to emit and receive electromagnetic wave. And this kind of cell, Chun-Ong had only seen in another biological test subject, and that was Magneto. But unlike the X gene, this kind of cell has a very big defect in energy level. The den mushi can only emit some long and short waves with all its strength, and it has little ability to harm living beings. Even if Chun-Ong tries his best to strengthen it, he can only make it emit some small electric current, which is far from a humanoid electromagnetic weapon like Magneto. But Chun-Ong has a lot of experience in the development of biological weapons, and he quickly perceived the most potential point. Since the quality can't be improved, then he will start from the quantity. The strength of this creature lies in the ability to conduct and accept electromagnetic waves, not in its power. Its role should be a huge electromagnetic wave generator. Its biggest weakness is that the cells do not have the ability to withstand strong electrical energy. Magneto's cells can accept a strong energy infusion, but the current of the den mushi will kill its cells. So Chun-Ong first started from here, using retroviruses to screen the relevant genes, and using the vampire virus to create bacteria with abnormally strong vitality. Then using retroviruses as a tool, the relevant functional genes of den mushi were grafted into the vampire bacteria. Using this extremely strong vitality, it can overcome many extreme cycles. It can survive normally up to the escape layer and down to the mantle. It carried the functional genes of the relevant biochemical weapons. In the end, Chun-Ong successfully cultivated what he wanted, the superbacteria that can carry more electricity, the electromagnetic tower bacteria. Its unique organelles, electrical mitochondria, can convert and receive electromagnetic waves, and can use electromagnetic waves to sustain life, polymerize nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen, and multiply. In this process, Chun-Ong used the genetic map of some carbon-based bacteria on gas planets to create this superbacteria that can divide and reproduce in the atmosphere. In the end, the bacteria colony cultivated in the laboratory was launched into the ionosphere with the portable satellite launching device brought by the samsara travelers. With the help of the abundant free electron energy and ionized gas there, the bacteria could divide and reproduce. The experiment failed twice, but only 2 weeks ago it succeeded. Now, the bacteria in the ionosphere had multiplied and divided to a large extent. The volume of these bacteria adds up to the size of 90 blue whales. Although they are evenly distributed over North Africa covering Egypt and part of the Arabian Peninsula, the unique electromagnetic communication mode allows them to connect with each other as if they are one. They form a huge electromagnetic communication network. On the ground, only the golden Den Den Mushi in Chen Eng's hand can control them. This electromagnetic network is part of the Earth control system conceived by Chen Ong, and it is also the carrier of the space-based weapons being developed. This huge electromagnetic network in the energy-rich ionosphere is not only expected to be part of the energy network of the future Earth control system, but also the energy source of the space-based weapons developed by Chen Ong. The golden Den Den Mushi cells were also embedded by Chen Ong into the body of the vampire octopus as part of the entire system, achieving sea-air network access. As Chen Ong quickly pressed a few keys in the Den Den Mushi in his hand, a series of complex electromagnetic wave information flow was transmitted into the ionosphere 60 kilometers above Chen Eng's head. The electromagnetic bacteria cloud covering all of Egypt and most of the Arabian Peninsula subtly adjusted the intensity and frequency of the battery wave, and the free electrons in the ionosphere were emitted to the low-altitude water vapor layer above Chen Eng's head. The static electricity in the air suddenly increased exponentially. Chen Ong looked at his slightly erect hair and silently calculated the amount of charge in the air. The rapidly increasing charge has caused friction and attraction of water vapor, and large pieces of clouds instantly enveloped the area along the Suez Canal. Baron Fermoy, who was waiting for the sunrise, looked at the dark clouds gathering in the sky doubtfully. The prelude to this storm seemed a bit strange, but he did not feel any traces of magic interference. Even the old bishop did not notice it. There seemed to be a huge force in the air, but this kind of natural force did not seem to be worth paying attention to. So although Baron Fermoy felt a little strange, he still ignored this dangerous sign. For Chen Ong, this was just a prelude. The thunderstorm power accumulated in the sky was just a prelude. It was to trigger a more powerful force later on. In 1899, Nikola Tesla tried to use the ionosphere to transmit energy wirelessly over long distances. He sent extremely low-frequency waves between the ground and the so-called Knorrli-Heisel layer of the ionosphere, trying to trigger the resonance of the ionosphere and achieve the infinite transmission of huge energy. Some people said that the Tunguska explosion that occurred in 1908 was the weaponized use of this achievement. In the Red Alert world, the Allies' ultimate weapon, the weather controller that could trigger lightning storms, was developed based on this achievement. Now the thunderstorm that was accumulating in the air could provide coordinates for the next space-based electromagnetic weapon strike. The thunderstorm was equivalent to a huge Tesla electromagnetic tower, triggering a direct attack from the ionosphere. The effect could be earth-shattering. Chen Ong was confident that he could wipe the entire military base off the map in the first place. Unfortunately, after triggering a space-based thunderstorm, the electromagnetic bacteria in the air will overload and lose a lot of energy. It will take at least a week before it can be used again. If we want to use it in the same place, we'll have to wait for another 3 weeks until the bacteria above the ionosphere have multiplied enough, Chen Ong sighed. But even so, this is still a powerful trump card. This time, the British Army is only a basic experiment to verify the basic functions. It's not time to launch an all-out attack yet. That's for Imogen. The thunderstorm was gradually forming in the sky. Baron Fermoy looked calmly at the dark clouds above his head. Beside him, Sir Edmund whispered, "Sir, in this weather, the vampires may be able to maintain most of their fighting power. Should we delay the operation a little?" Baron Fermoy raised his hand to stop him from saying anything else. "Proceed according to plan. Although the weather factor is unexpected, the risk will be greater if the plan is delayed. With sufficient preparations on our side, the vampires will definitely not be able to turn the tables. Everything is still under control." Chapter 675. The night before dawn, it was still raining cats and dogs. Time passed slowly. It was supposed to be sunrise, but the sky was still dark. Baron Fermoy looked up and saw that the sky was covered by dark clouds. The sky was as dark as twilight, and he could only hear the sound of flowing water. The curtain of rain covered his eyes and the horizon. On the vast Suez Canal, the liner slowly passed by him. The whistle of the steam engine woke up many of the British soldiers who were still asleep. Baron Fermoy said coldly, "Time's up." He put on his raincoat and took out a black umbrella from the door of his office. He walked into the rain, his black boots stepping on the muddy water, splashing nearly a foot high. The rain washed everything in front of him, converging into a muddy stream, forming puddles of muddy water in the open space of the camp. Even Baron Fermoy couldn't help but step in the mud. He came to the center of the camp, where a considerable number of British soldiers were already busy. They carried real guns and ammunition, and a few drivers braved the heavy rain to repair a few military transport trucks. The rest were already lined up, ready to go at any time. Among these soldiers, there was a row of black-robed clergymen. They were solemn, silent, and orderly. Dozens of them stood together without making a sound, which made Baron Fermoy nod his head. As expected of the elites of the Church of the Saints, priests who fought against dark creatures all year round. The old bishop, supported by a servant, came from behind. He saw Baron Fermoy's serious face and said, "If it's this kind of weather, the strength of those vampires won't be weakened much. And the rain will bring chaos and trouble." Baron Fermoy said in a low voice, "We'll minimize the trouble." The old bishop glared at him and snorted, "Don't underestimate the dark creatures. If they can survive the pursuit of humans, they must have something worth looking at. In the process of Great Britain's conquest of the world, we've seen too many incredible things. Evil gods worshipped by the natives, hidden evil creatures, dangerous black magic, and so on. There are too many. But the thing that appeared in Cairo not long ago is one of the most difficult I've ever seen. The greatest high priest of ancient Egypt, Imidon. Ever since the curse was resurrected, he's become even more terrifying. But there's still someone in Cairo who can fight him. This person should be the mastermind behind the Eye of Horus we're looking for. Be careful of him. Even though we have brought with us almost half of the Holy Duke's forces, as well as the Gurkha mercenary camp, the mysterious existences we control and employ, you still have to be careful. This is a message from the Lord. May the Lord bless us. May the Lord bless us," Baron Fermoy said in a low voice. Dozens of black-robed clergy boarded the transport vehicles. Several trucks were neatly loaded with hundreds of British soldiers, many of whom were chosen from the colonies. Dozens of cavalrymen rushed out first. They were responsible for guarding the convoy and clearing the path in the heavy rain. There were also dozens of short native soldiers passing through the forest on both sides. The convoy slowly drove along the road of the base towards their target. The African mercenaries with spears and bows in their hands ran vigorously on both sides of the road. They were extremely fast. Stepping on the muddy water with their bare feet, their speed was actually not slower than the trucks beside them. The soldiers moved forward in the rain, but the rain couldn't obstruct their vision. As for the cavalry that followed the convoy, they carried damison-shaped machetes on their waist. Their bodies rose and fell as the horses galloped. Their eyes were sharp, and their aura was awe-inspiring. There was no doubt that they could pull out the machetes at their waists at any time and tear the enemies in front of them to pieces. Their destination was a camp not far from the main camp. The black-robed priests had already locked onto a large number of officers who had been turned into vampires. Under the cover of the heavy rain, they would clear out these heavily damaged areas one by one. Chen Ong stood on the bow of the whistling passenger ship, slowly moving downstream. From the Suez Canal, he could see Baron Fermoy's convoy moving side by side with them. Chen Ong looked at the people traveling with them. At this time, they were already close to the camp. Baron Fermoy's men were at the entrance of the camp. He saw the Baron sitting in the passenger seat of the truck and opened the gate without saying a word, letting the convoy in. The commotion alerted the British soldiers in the camp. They watched nervously as Baron Fermoy jumped out of the truck in the rain without even taking an umbrella. Then, elite gendarmes jumped out of the back of the truck and formed up behind Baron Fermoy. What surprised the soldiers was that there was a group of priests in black robes following behind them. Baron Fermoy looked at the soldiers poking their heads out of the barracks and shouted, "Now, for the sake of Great Britain's national security and counter-espionage mission, we have concrete evidence that there are German spies hiding in this camp. All soldiers are forbidden from entering or leaving the barracks. All of you are to stay in your barracks. Those who leave their barracks without permission will be dealt with according to military law. Those who resist with firearms will be executed on the spot. All of you are to stay in your beds. When the gendarmes enter, put your hands behind your head and lie down with your backs to the door. You are not allowed to communicate or spy on others. Your only task now is to lie in bed with your hands behind your head. Otherwise, the gendarmes will have the right to execute you." The messenger loudly repeated Baron Fermoy's orders. The soldiers following the Baron had already split into small teams and entered the camp to patrol. They first herded the soldiers who were still outside the barracks into the barracks and guarded the various checkpoints and doors. When Baron Fermoy stepped into the barracks, these small teams had already broken into the first barrack. The captain of the gendarmes looked at the roster in his hands and said to an officer in the barracks, "Are you Chief Warrant Officer Heyman?" Heyman stood up from his bed and looked at the gendarmes. "Yes, Your Excellency. What's wrong?" "Please come with us," the captain of the gendarmes said expressionlessly. Heyman didn't utter a word. Instead, he looked at the black-robed clergyman behind him and sneered in a low voice, "Looks like you've discovered us." The gendarmes immediately tightened their grip on their guns. The priest who Heyman was staring at also pressed his right hand against the Bible on his chest. After a moment of hesitation, he opened his mouth and said, "You." At this moment, an officer behind Heyman suddenly burst forth. He buried his head and rushed forward like a wild boar. Before the gendarmes could even react, he heavily smashed into their bodies. The gendarmes could clearly hear the sound of their own bones breaking. The black-robed clergyman, who was being protected by everyone, felt a pain in his chest. A sweet smell of blood gushed out from his lungs. He pulled out the cross dagger at his waist and fiercely pressed it down. Just as he was about to stab into the body of the exploding officer, Heyman had already jumped up high and pounced on him. Sharp claws instantly tore open his artery, while Heyman leaned over his neck and gulped down large mouthfuls of his blood. At the same time, the other member of the Blood tribe had already massacred all of the gendarmerie. Heyman rushed out of the room with the corpses as gunshots rang out from all directions. However, the majority of the shots were blocked by the corpses in front of him. Occasionally, one or two of the bullets would slip through the net and pierce into Heyman's body. However, they were quickly squeezed out by his regenerating muscles. Heyman pounced towards the most junk in the barracks, intending to use the cover to escape. At this moment, a white light shot out from behind and struck his back. Heyman let out a blood-curdling scream before turning into ashes in the white light. The other vampire who had cooperated with him to escape was also struck in the heart by a silver bullet that had been soaked in holy water. Heyman's resistance seemed to have drawn the curtains of a riot. Dozens of vampires chose to suddenly attack at this moment. Some of them were immediately killed by the gendarmes, but most of them were massacred by the gendarmes. However, the black-robed clergyman found an opportunity. Baron Fermoy calmly looked at the riot that had broken out in the barrack. He only dispatched snipers when the enemies rushed out of the barrack. However, this was after all a minority. Most of the vampires were successfully confined to a relatively small space. The black-robed clergyman killed the exposed vampires with astonishing efficiency. Chapter 676. The Suez military base was shrouded in heavy rain at night. O'Connell and the rest were wading through the muddy water. After they disembarked at Port Said, they didn't directly take the boat to London. Instead, they headed towards the British military base in Suez. When O'Connell was a British officer, he had served in this military base for a few years. He could not bear to see the British officers and soldiers here fall under the claws of the devil, so he hired a local carriage overnight. Unexpectedly, when they arrived nearby, the Suez Canal suddenly rained heavily, forcing them to abandon the carriage. Jonathan, who was following behind, complained, "In my opinion, that man is a good man who keeps his word. They gave us what we deserve. We're already rich. O'Connor, we can live a noble's life in Britain now. Why do we have to take the risk here? I hate taking risks. If we die, won't all the gold that I've won be given to others? A good man who installed a bomb in your leg?" O'Connor sneered. "That's very excessive." Jonathan was stunned for a moment before nodding. "But compared to those greedy and ruthless people, he's not bad. At least he gave us the promised gold and let us go." "Greedy? Are you talking about yourself, brother?" Evelyn stepped on the mud with difficulty. With O'Connor's help, she jumped over a puddle of water. After she stood firm, she turned around and said, "And he killed a lot of people. In Cairo, in Hamunata, in the whole of Egypt. I'm afraid those ruthless people that you said have not seen as many people as they have killed." "So?" Jonathan spread his hands. "That's why we have to warn those damned bureaucrats that such a terrifying force has appeared in Egypt. O'Connell said that he knew a lot of people when he was an officer in Suez. Maybe we can alert those people, and we can take a boat to London from here." As she spoke, she looked back at Jonathan in surprise. "You can't be thinking that we can bring so much gold on board so easily, right? They will check our luggage, and when we reach the sea, those lawless sailors will sink us into the Mediterranean Sea. Without O'Connor, we won't be able to transport the gold. And we can't just sit back and watch innocent people die in front of us." Jonathan looked around, especially at the coachman leading the way. O'Connor said, "Stop looking, I deliberately chose a local who doesn't speak English. He can only understand our hand gestures." Jonathan then said in a low voice, "I know a lot of ways to get on the ship without checking the luggage. As long as we guard the luggage closely, there will be no problem. Let's not get sucked into those damn whirlpools again. If I had nothing I wouldn't mind, but we're rich now. I don't want to bring a huge amount of wealth with me and fall into hell with regret." At this time, Jonathan realized that O'Connor and Evelyn were looking at him in silence. Evelyn looked at him and shook her head slightly. "We can't get rid of this whirlpool, because we have long been in it. This is fate. Even if we run to London, the High Priest Imidon and those people will still appear in front of us. Our struggle is as ridiculous as trying to get rid of the shadow under the sun. Because all of this is because of us." After saying that, Evelyn once again sped up, ignoring the blank expression on Jonathan's face, and went to the Suez military base in front of them. Soon, they came to the sentry post at the entrance of the military base. O'Connor went to the guard to inquire, while Evelyn and Jonathan stayed where they were. They waited outside for a while, and someone came to pick them up. A bearded officer shouted to O'Connor from afar, "Hey! O'Connor, my old friend, I heard you retired?" O'Connor introduced to them, "This is Jacob, my comrade in arms and good friend. Jacob, I need to board a ship from here to London, and we have to warn you about something. Do you know the symbol of the Eye of Horus?" Jacob's expression changed instantly. He looked behind him cautiously, then leaned in close to O'Connell's face and pressed down on his neck. With his back facing the sentinel, he whispered, "Damn it! How do you know about this thing? Listen, O'Connor, you must not say that name here. The military camp is no longer under our control. A group of noble officers from London has taken control of the situation, and now I have no power. They are here to deal with the organization you mentioned. In my opinion, sooner or later, there will be a massacre here. Don't get involved in this muddy water." After listening to this shocking news, O'Connor was silent for a moment and suddenly said firmly, "Where is that noble officer? You want to bring us to see him. Are you crazy? When they kill people, they don't care if you are British or not, and they don't treat us as their own people." "But we have something important to talk to him about," O'Connell said. "It's about the Eye of Horus, the things that happened in Cairo, Hamunaptra, and many other things. If you don't tell them about these things, you will be in a very dangerous situation. You will be in a very dangerous situation. You don't know your opponent well enough." Jacob listened and stared at O'Connor. He saw determination in O'Connor's eyes and said helplessly, "Fine. I'll bring you there. I hope you don't come out lying down, that would be too sad." Ignoring Jonathan's protest, O'Connor took a few people to an off-road vehicle and drove to Baron Fermoy's camp. Jacob took them through a few checkpoints, but in the end, they were stopped at the entrance of the camp. O'Connor went up to negotiate, but when he saw half a battalion of nervous soldiers inside the checkpoint, he didn't think the result of his negotiation would be good. Sure enough, after a while, Jacob came back and said, "They told us to wait here. The Baron will come out in a while." O'Connor heard the fierce gunshots and screams coming from inside the camp. He felt very depressed, and turned his head to look at the Suez Canal. A large ship was slowly flowing down the river, and on the bow, O'Connor thought he saw a familiar figure. He asked Jacob for a pair of binoculars, and when he really saw the figure on the ship, O'Connor screamed. "No, no!" Chapter 677. O'Connor saw Chen Ong glide across the water like a swallow before the two collided, gliding towards the camp. His figure was dragged by some small silver light, and upon closer inspection, it could be seen that it was some fine lightning. The moment he stepped onto the embankment, a dazzling bolt of lightning suddenly struck down from behind. In the heavy rain, a blurry shadow, dragging a faint mist behind it, shot towards the camp. The soldiers on guard inside raised their guns and pointed in the direction of the collision. When Baron Foy heard the noise and came out, he just happened to see Chen Ong wrapped in countless interweaving lightning bolts, descending from the sky like a god of thunder. The vigorous native mercenaries gathered their courage and went forward to stop him, while the soldiers used the fortifications to try and stop his advance. But it was all in vain. Small lightning chains jumped between the soldiers, and as Chen Ong gently waved them, the electric snakes were like long whips, radiating from his palms into countless long lightning snakes. It was as if Chen Ong was pulling their tails, spreading them across the ground in an instant. Amidst the roar of thunder and the pouring rain, lightning wreaked havoc, forming a fan shape hundreds of meters in front of Chen Ong. The bodies of all the people inside suddenly shook and were thrown high up into the air. They felt a scorching electric current fiercely colliding with their bodies. The power formed by the electric current threw them high up into the air. The heat of the electric current wreaked havoc on their bodies, turning some parts of them into charcoal. However, under Chen Ang's control, they did not die, but they no longer had the strength to resist. Under a certain degree of precision, high-voltage lightning was actually an effective energy-disabling weapon. But in theory, no one could control such precision, let the lightning hit the human body, and yet maintain an extremely short speed without causing fatal injuries. No one could do it. O'Connor saw countless dancing silver snakes suddenly appear in the thunderclouds in the sky. These lightning bolts spread to the ground, and at this moment, a thunderstorm descended from the sky. His ears were filled with loud noises, and countless huge roars of thunder almost made him lose consciousness. The dazzling light of the lightning made him unable to open his eyes. At this moment, the camp in front of them was like a prison of lightning. Loud noise and dazzling light were the best disabling weapons. In modern times, they were often used to disperse rioting crowds. The former was called disabling bomb, and the latter was called flash bomb. Both of them were used to subdue people without shedding a drop of blood by attacking their fragile senses. It was as if hundreds of disabling bombs and flash grenades were wreaking havoc in the barracks. Chen-Ong had no intention of protecting their fragile sight and hearing. Apart from the unlucky ones who were killed by the lightning, countless people lost their hearing at this moment. Only a very small number of people who had undergone special strengthening and training could see clearly under such circumstances. The vampires were able to do so, and so were some of the priests. The archbishop looked at the terrifying shadow in the dense lightning and lamented, "Oh God! Have you come to punish us personally?" He trembled as he raised the cross in his hand and shot out a soul-burning holy light in that direction. At this moment, a silver light pierced through his heart. Under the powerful voltage, the second in command of the Protestant Church of England, the Archbishop of York, died silently. Baron Fermoy roared at the figure in the lightning in despair. Chen-Ang's consciousness sensed the rich electric charge in the clouds. Under his guidance, an even more violent wave of lightning fell from the sky, turning the entire camp into hell. O'Connor was outside the camp, watching it turn into a pile of ruins in the lightning. The electromagnetic network on the ionosphere was rich in the ionosphere's free electrons, which were closer to the Sun's atmosphere and were the first to come into contact with the Sun's energy. Photons carried rich energy and ionized most of the atoms here, causing them to transition in energy levels and release free electrons. These free electrons and ions contained a huge amount of energy. This powerful energy was used by the electromagnetic network laid by Chen-Ong to form a thundercloud rich in electric charge above the Suez military base, giving birth to the thunderstorm. But this power, which was so powerful that it could easily destroy most of the power of the Holy Church controlled by Baron Fermoy, was only a small prelude. It was not much different from the high-voltage electric towers set up in the Tunguska region during the Terrace experiment. The rich electric charge only served to provide a coordinate. Chen-Ong slowly walked out of the camp. He gradually moved away from the center of the thunderstorm, and the soldiers at the checkpoint and O'Connor gradually saw his appearance. He did not look like he had walked out of the center of the thunderstorm. Instead, he was very calm and composed. The rich electric charge evaporated the water on his body, and even the heavy rain could not extinguish the raging thunder in the center of the camp. When Chen-Ong walked towards the checkpoint, the soldiers on guard did not dare to stop him. They were like a group of frightened rabbits, huddled together, and watched as Chen-Ong walked out of the checkpoint they were guarding. O'Connell saw the face that appeared in every one of his nightmares. Under O'Connell's horrified gaze, Chen-Ong turned back slightly and used his finger to guide the thunderstorm. With a huge bolt of lightning in the air, he drew the symbol of the Eye of Horus. Devil! Devil! Some soldiers could not bear the huge psychological pressure and were ready to open fire. Another bolt of lightning shot out from the thunderstorm and nailed him to the ground. Jacob didn't know if it was an illusion or something else, but he seemed to see the tip of the lightning forming a strange spear. But in reality, he couldn't see the lightning at all. At that speed, all he could see was a blinding flash of lightning. The explosion caused by the lightning threw the comrade next to the soldier high into the air. When Chen-Ong walked past O'Connor, he reminded him, "You'd better leave this area as soon as possible. The prelude is about to end. The electric charge here is enough to form a target. The real attack is about to come. I think you should run at least 5,000 meters away to be relatively safe." O'Connor said with a trembling voice, "But your enemies are no longer here. They have been sent to hell by you. What else do you want?" "The main purpose is to do an experiment. To see the strength and launch time of the space-based weather attack weapon, and at the same time to get some improved data." Chen-Ong looked back and said calmly, "As for them, it's just along the way. For the enemy we have to deal with next, some lightning can't hit them." Chen-Ong seemed to be calm, but his speed was not slow. When O'Connor woke up the soldiers who had almost lost their minds in the checkpoint and drove the truck a few kilometers away, Chen-Ang's cargo ship on the Suez Canal slowly passed them. Then, a strong light illuminated the entire sky. At 7:17 a.m. on June 30, 1908, near the Tunguska River in the Evenki Autonomous Region of Siberia, Russia, 800 kilometers northwest of Lake Baikal, latitude 60.55 degrees north, longitude 101.57 degrees east, a strong light illuminated the vast land from Siberia to Western Europe. Then, it triggered a big explosion equivalent to the combined energy of 1,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs. The fire caused by the explosion burned down the virgin forest within hundreds of miles around, and herds of reindeer were burned to ashes in the fire. O'Connell could only see a vast expanse of whiteness in front of him. Then, the shock wave lifted the military vehicle he was in high up into the air. Due to the protection of the protagonist's halo, he was lucky enough to land in the Suez Canal. The core area of the thunderstorm was completely obliterated by the direct attack of the space-based weapons. At this moment, the powerful electric current even distorted the space at the core. Chapter 678. The airship slowly landed in the ruins. Although Chen Ong had accidentally killed a lot of vampires of Horus's eye during the experiment, the explosion only happened in the core camp, and there were few casualties in other areas that were blocked. The explosion destroyed the order maintained by the British special agents, and the vampires of Horus's eye, who had been suppressed by them, regained control of the situation. With the chaos after the explosion, they regained control of the military base. Now they were expanding rapidly with the help of the people that Chen Ong brought. On the one hand, they purged the entire military base, and on the other hand, they developed their descendants among the remaining officers. Even if the British sent more people next time, it would be impossible for them to regain control of the Suez region. Chen Ong left most of the people that he brought with him. The banks of the Suez Canal would become the second largest base of Horus's eye, second only to Cairo. The vampires of Horus's eye would infiltrate various parts of Europe through this transportation route. In the short 2 days that Chen Ong sorted out the Suez region, they controlled a banker in France, the head of a factory in Ruhr, Germany, and sent a few spies to London, England. With the help of this Eurasian artery, the virus of Horus's eye was continuously injected into Europe and the Far East. They went to England, Germany, France, Belgium, Russia, India, and China. Compared to the steady and crushing forces in Egypt, this time, they secretly expanded at a speed that was 100 times faster than before. After dealing with most of the institutional work in the Suez region, Chen Ong returned to Cairo by airship. Zhao-Yingqi's eyes were sunken, and her face was as pale as a vampire's. She had not been strengthened and modified by the vampires. The reason why she looked so haggard was purely because she was tired. Obviously, Chen Ong was using women as livestock again. The tradition of samsara travelers treating women as livestock and men as robots was cruelly passed on by Chen Ong. As the most durable true ancestor of vampires, Hong Fan had been put on the top priority list by Chen Ong, and he had less than an hour of free time every day. Although Zhang Ziqiang did not need to go out to the field to kill people, organizing the relevant documents took up 60% of his time, and he had to review the intelligence in the remaining time. When Horus's eye was expanding rapidly, the swarm of important intelligence could drive anyone crazy. Zhao-Yingqi only had a little free time when she was running back. She endured the fatigue and injected herself with an anti-fatigue potion. After a while, when the potion took effect, she barely mustered her strength and said, "Boss, I can't take it anymore. Can I take a leave after this business trip?" Without turning his head, Chen Ong said, "No, the Horus's Eye organization is currently transforming from a regional organization in Egypt to a global organization. There is a lot of work to be done. As the team member in charge of monitoring the Horus's Eye, you must ensure that we have control during this process and that the organization we create will not go out of control. It is estimated that we will return to the God dimension after we finish the second plot ahead of time. In the third storyline, which is the confrontation between the undead empires of the East and the West, we will not be able to directly control the Eye of Horus for a long time. Therefore, we must strengthen our influence on this organization during this limited period of time. Zhao took a deep breath when she heard this. She was deeply afraid that she would relax and become completely useless. She asked curiously, "Actually, you don't have to come in person for this field mission, boss. This kind of small matter shouldn't require you to do it yourself. As long as you give control of the space-based weapons, any team leader of the 9 Pillar Gods can take care of it. If I don't come, how would Imodin dare to do it?" Chun-Ong shook his head gently and said, "I left the black scripture of the undead in Cairo because I want Imodin to reveal his trump card. But if I am in Cairo, Imodin will suspect that I am secretly controlling his trump card. On the one hand, he has to guard against the Egyptian gods, so he can't act in person, and on the other hand, he is worried that I will interfere. So only when I leave Cairo will he send someone to retrieve the black scripture of the undead and reveal his trump card." Imodin stood in the deepest part of the Abu Simbel temple. Huge stone statues were lined up along the long corridor. This was a temple carved in the rock cave. Every year, only the spring equinox, Ramesses II's birthday, and the autumn equinox, Ramesses II's Ascension Day, could sunlight pass through the long corridor and shine on where Imodin was standing. The bracelet of Thanatos had already shown the location of the Amzi oasis, but Imodin was still waiting for someone. Shin-Tu Gong slowly walked into the temple with the morning light behind him. Behind him were 4 mysterious people. The first person on the left was a woman with a veil. She wore a robe similar to that of an Arab, and her face was hidden behind the veil. Unlike the Arab veil, her eyes were also hidden behind the veil, and they seemed to be completely closed. The second person on the left was a cloud of fog. Although he had the shape of a person, he looked completely made of a cloud of constantly squirming black fog. The first person on the right was not a person at all. It was a distorted shadow. It was formed from light, shadow, and distorted space. It was like an indescribable glass-like object. It was the most dangerous and creepiest person among the 4. The last person was a woman, but humans could not look at her face directly, so no one knew what she looked like. When the 4 arrived at the Abu Simbel temple, there were strange changes in the temple. The broken stone statues around them suddenly recovered, but sometimes the statues would twist into a strange form. The original long corridor suddenly extended a long distance, making Imodin feel like he was at the end of the long corridor, on a dot far, far away. When Shin-Tu Gong led them to Imodin, he felt like he had stepped into a labyrinth of time and space. Sometimes, people dressed like ancient Egyptian priests appeared beside him, and he listened to them talking in ancient Egyptian. Sometimes, a group of modern Western tourists walked up to him, carrying backpacks and taking pictures with their smartphones. Sometimes, he saw Egyptians dressed like Arabs, who were talking loudly in Arabic. Chapter 679. When he was young, when he was old, it was as if he had compressed his entire life's 4-dimensional state into a 3-dimensional world of himself. Shin-Tu Gong walked forward, but with every step he took, there would be another him behind him. Sometimes it would be his appearance when he was young, and sometimes he would emit a powerful and awe-inspiring aura. As a warrior who had cultivated the Book of the Chaos to the Earth Kunlun realm, Shin-Tu Gong even saw a certain him, using Purple Star River to tear apart space, and powerful auras collided in the temple. An endless surge of true martial intent rushed towards him, and the angry roar of a hymn sounded in his ears. Gong-e does not care about the past. Even if you are my past, die for me. The mysterious existence formed from light and shadow suddenly spread out in all directions. All the light and shadow, including the hymn that Shin-Tu Gong left behind, were distorted into a chaotic state. The Purple Star River that was rushing towards him was also distorted into an indescribable state. There was no space, no time, no existence. Of course, there was no absolute killing intent and lethality to slash at himself. Even though Shintugong's will was incomparably strong, he could not help but feel his blood run cold. As he walked forward, he left behind a human-shaped phantom that was the size of his 6-year-old self. It was filled with indescribable distortions. The woman whose face could not be seen, for some unknown reason, suddenly extended her hand towards the shadow he left behind. Some sort of existence on her body seemed to dispel the distortions, revealing the 6-year-old Shintugong, who was wearing children's clothing, standing there in a daze. When Shintugong saw the woman extend her hand towards him, a ruthless look flashed in his eyes. A saber light flashed, chopping at the woman's outstretched hands. At this moment, another veiled woman suddenly opened her eyes. Her eyes seemed to lead to a bottomless abyss. At this moment, Shintugong felt that he had chopped at a distorted point in space. With that point as the center, everything around him suddenly disappeared. His saber was cut in the middle, and the blade that had reached into the spherical space had already disappeared without a trace. The woman who could not look directly at her face placed her hand on little Shintugong's face. Shintugong only felt a creepy feeling crawl up his heart. That suffocating feeling of danger made him completely unable to suppress his killing intent. Imiden sternly shouted, "Enough! See, make it, Kasaikamwe, come here." Only then did the woman, whose face was shrouded in a layer of fog, stop what she was doing. She slowly retracted her hand, and at the instant she left little Shintu's hand, as if she was careless, she used her sharp nails to leave a tiny wound under little Shintu's eye. Shintugong was completely enraged. All the Kunlun chi in his body surged out from his hands. Imiden shouted, "Stop! Shintu Palace!" A powerful spiritual deterrence suppressed Shintugong's violent chi, and Imiden sincerely said, "I apologize for Sirmate's foolish behavior." As he spoke, Imiden glanced coldly at the invisible woman. His eyes were like an abyss of chaos, causing her body to tremble slightly. "Kasa Kemwe, retract your presence. All of you come here," Imiden said coldly to the four of them. At this moment, the space-time disorder slowly disappeared. Shintugong and the others appeared directly in front of Imiden. Shintugong realized that the state of his body had changed. As a warrior, his keen sense of smell allowed him to realize that he did not seem to have teleported in front of Imiden, but had appeared in the future where he had appeared in front of Imiden. His posture, strength exertion, physical state, and even the speed of his blood flow had all changed. It was as if a period of time had been skipped in between. Shintugong extended his right hand and touched his left eye. An old scar that had not been there before had appeared. It was exactly the same shape as the one that Sirmate had scratched. The scar had already scabbed over. Through his high understanding of his body, Shintugong realized that it was an old scar. Even though it had not appeared before he entered the temple, after it appeared, it had already been caused a long time ago. Furthermore, based on the current state of the wound, it should have been left behind when he was 6 years old. Shintugong's face was calm, but his heart was filled with killing intent. Imiden looked at the 5 people who had come in front of him. He turned his head and said to Shintugong, "You have completed your mission well. I will compensate you for today's offense. You may leave first. I will personally give you the reward and compensation for the mission later." Shintugong bowed slightly and calmly retreated without looking at the 4 people. After Shintugong walked out of the temple, Imiden looked at the 4 people who did not look like humans and sighed. 2,500 years have passed, but you are still willing to serve me. I am very happy. His eyes silently swept across the 4 people as he read out their names one by one. Kasaikamwe, Sekimib, Sirmate, Menes. My adopted sons and daughters, I was once the high priest of Egypt, so I turned a blind eye to the hatred in your hearts. I know that your hearts are burning with the flames of revenge. You desire to drink the blood of your father God and take revenge for everything they have done to you. Now, my heart is burning with the same flames as yours. The purpose of our survival is for revenge. Now I will release you. I will control you. I will help you take revenge. I will destroy and slaughter and take revenge on the gods. The gods of Egypt will usher in destruction and dusk. We will step on their corpses and usher in a new world. Sekhemib, who was one of the 4 people below, slowly said, "We are the children of God, but they see us as monsters. When we were born, when we were extremely weak, you extended a helping hand to us and took us in. My brothers and sisters died in the mouths of the gods. They ate our bodies and divinity, and banished our souls to the underworld. You have saved us. We have been imprisoned for 2,500 years and have been deprived of all glory. Today we are willing to take revenge on the gods with you and let them have a taste of the suffering we have suffered." Sekhemib stepped forward and lifted Imidon's hand. He placed it on his body and let the black fog envelop Imidon's hand. He opened up the anger, hatred, and fear that had been accumulating in his heart for a long time to Imidon. "Take us, the unfilial children, and take revenge on the gods, Father." Imidon looked at the death bracelet on his wrist and said indifferently, "They will never know how big of a mistake they have made. You have to hide your names, because your names hide your secrets and weaknesses. I will help you cover up your past. Remember, the gods are not powerful. They are like towering trees. All their power is used to fight against their own existence. They are big and useless. One small mistake is enough to erase them. Rather than saying that they killed the gods, it is better to say that they overpowered themselves. This world no longer needs the existence of the gods." Chapter 680. The next morning, the airship appeared above the Nile River and gazed at the great pyramids of Giza in the distance, bathed in sunlight. Chen Ong stood at the bow of the airship. He could already feel the changes and huge variables in this world. In the system operated by the Lord God, there was a huge error in the gear of this mummy world, although this error was not to the extent of tearing a hole in the Lord God's multidimensional system. This kind of variable could even cause the violent surge of the world's origin tide, which was exactly what the Lord God wanted to achieve. However, just like how supplements would become poison when the amount reached a certain level, this kind of surging origin tide and world variable would also cause a huge tear in the Lord God system if it reached a certain level. And Chen Ong had already planted the seed. The huge surge and change of the world caused by the tearing of the world would give the Republic a new foundation. This would allow the Republic to obtain a new foundation. At that time, the virus known as civilization would cause exponential growth. No one could underestimate the immense potential of civilization, not to mention the fact that this civilization was a heaven's apocalypse. Chen Ong had specially cultivated a civilization with extremely high variables and uncontrollable characteristics. In Chen Ang's eyes, countless data and information rolled into a torrent. According to information cosmology, if the demon Laplace knows all the information and relevant variables in the universe, he will show the entire process of the universe, past and future. Omniscience means omnipotence. At that time, the entire universe will be reduced in dimension relative to him, because all variables can be calculated, and all changes can be predicted. At my level, quantum changes are known, and the algorithms of human consciousness are also known. He has already recognized the souls of the entire universe and reached the level of information unification. He can modify and control the universe, and he can pursue more unknowns. However, the reason why he can reach this level is because of the uncontrollable nature of the souls of living beings, or rather, intelligent beings, which are variables. This kind of variable that exceeds cognition is the miracle of relative cognition. He can only complete the evolution of cognitive structure and information construction by expanding his variables to infinity. However, the variables of an individual life are limited. Just like humans, their behavior patterns, memories, emotions, and everything else have rules and can be recognized. This regularity and cognition is the reason why variables are constrained and miracles are created. It's impossible for humans to know the entire universe because humans are existences that contain a set of three views and information structures. Just like any orderly machine, they have limitations. To surpass these limitations, one has to make oneself infinite. Don't restrict yourself, understand and transform yourself, constantly change yourself, and obtain progress and potential. Just like an autonomous robot that can infinitely recognize and modify itself, if a robot can use external resources to upgrade itself and input external information to create variables, then given enough time, it will continue to evolve endlessly. This is what it means to be limitless. In this process, all achievements can be abandoned, all common sense can be falsified, and it will be infinitely closer to the truth. That's how I am. I've killed my past self countless times, abandoned the variables that have been concluded from the rules, abandoned countless past selves, and approached the infinite. Apart from a Tao heart that is based on science, cognition, nobility, and research to change the world. Everything can be abandoned in the next change, including human nature and the cognitive structure of being human. Infinity without constraints will eventually lose its variables and become an objective law, losing the most precious thing in the soul of intelligent creatures: infinite possibilities. Chen-Ong sighed and said to Zhao-Yingqi beside him, "Send a signal to gather the reincarnators." Imodin should have already discovered the location of the Yangtze oasis. The last battle before we leave this world is coming. As the airship slowly descended, Zhang Ziqiang, Hong Fan, and the other reincarnators of the 9 provinces team, as well as the captains of the other reincarnation teams, appeared on the landing platform of the airship. The captain of the Dream Demon team, Edward, heard Chen-Ong say, "I won't go down. You guys come up. We'll set off for the Yangtze oasis now." Edward asked doubtfully, "Do you know where the Yangtze oasis is? We've searched all the relevant clues for the past 2 days, but we haven't found any traces of it. Even Imodin has to use the death bracelet to search for it." "How do you know?" "Imodin isn't looking for the location of the Yangtze oasis because he already knows where it is. He's going to complete the necessary ritual to open the death bracelet and go to the 4 temples to obtain a lot of information about the death god." Chen-Ong replied, "The Yangtze oasis isn't hard to find, but it's not in this world, and it's not the oasis you think it is. Most of the time, it exists in an imaginary space and doesn't exist in the real world. The death god's hand is its coordinates, and only the death bracelet can make it devote itself to the world. I suspect that the entire Yangtze oasis is in the death god's dream, or it might even be the yang side of his divine realm. The land covered by the Yangtze oasis isn't the human world." Edward was horrified. "Are you saying that the place we're going to might be the divine realm of a god?" Chen-Ong shook his head. "It's not a divine realm. It's at most a form of the physical world. It has 2 states that can be changed at any time. One is the real space state and the other is the imaginary space state. In the imaginary space, this world has no length, width, or height. It doesn't even exist in the form of a physical object, so it's a strange state. That's why Anubis can expand and collapse such a huge space at any time in this non-divine era when divine power is declining. This is an application of the observation and law of the real world. It's an existence built according to the laws of science. Of course, if you study it with magic, you can also find some laws. According to the system of magic, it's an inherent boundary. Only there can Anubis escape the restraints of the rules of the real world, and it can manifest part of the true God and exert its greatest power." Edward was shocked. In other words, the Yangtze oasis is Anubis's territory, and K can use his power to a certain extent. It's like a divine realm on Earth? Chen-Ong looked at him as if he were looking at an idiot. "That means that after all I've said, you still think of it as a divine realm. Fine. If you want, you can think of it that way," said Chen-Ong helplessly. Chapter 681. I'm not the one who wants to kill K. It's Immoden. We're just there to witness it. Chen Ong smiled. If Edward had not heard Chen Ang's explanation of the nature of the Amzi oasis, he might still have had the courage to take the risk. However, now that he knew that they were going to a 10-star monster that could, in theory, easily crush all the reincarnators here, it was a place where he could display most of his strength. Moreover, there was 100% chance that a huge battle would break out. Nonsense, Immoden was going to kill them, so how could they get along peacefully? Now, Immoden was heading to the Ames Oasis in the name of completing the Death God's trial, but Chen Ong knew that he wanted to kill a god. The reincarnators had also guessed that someone wanted to kill a god. Shin Tu Gong's Yamateam even knew most of Immoden's plans. Perhaps even Anubis knew that Immoden wanted to kill him. In this game, Chen Ong had forced and supported Immoden, while Shin Tu Gong had supported Immoden most of the time. Immoden also had the help of the 4 abominations. He also had the help of a large group of reincarnators under Chen Ang's control. As for Anubis, apart from K himself, he might also be able to get the support of some god. A fierce battle was bound to unfold between the two sides. This time, no matter which side the samsara travelers belonged to, whether they had ulterior motives or not, they were at least on the same side, coveting the rewards of killing a god. Therefore, Edward calculated for a while and felt that the risk was still under control, so he still boarded the airship. With him as an example, the other samsara team leaders calculated for a while. The special living environment of samsara travelers made them not want to give up any possible huge gains. They were trained by the Lord God to instinctively want to cause trouble. Moreover, even though Chen Ong pointed out the danger of the Amzi oasis, they still felt that the danger in the oasis hadn't reached the critical point after reading the original work. In other words, the risk was still under control. That was why they boarded the airship that was heading towards the Amzi oasis. David could not help but ask, according to what you said before, the Necklace of Death is not only a map to the Amzi oasis, but also a key to open the Amzi oasis. We have never studied the key. How can you locate the existence of that space? Have you ever heard of star feng shui? Chen Ong asked, pointing at the vast blue sky above his head. Are you talking about locating through astrology? David frowned. I've heard of it, but I don't know much about it. Then don't you understand the sensing of dragon veins in alchemy, the study of geomagnetic fields in cultivation, the sensing of planetary magnetic fields in geology, the interaction principle of energy field information in information science, the mechanism of geomagnetic fields in magic research, the theory of the vacuum ocean in the plane tide of magic, the study of the plane structure in arcana research, the inherent nature of barriers in magic theory, and the perception of the warrior? David looked embarrassed. He answered, I don't understand any of that. Chen Ong finally nodded. That's right. If you don't understand any of that, how can you understand if I tell you? There was no disdain in Chen Ong's eyes. There was only seriousness and honesty, but he made David feel the most embarrassed. David's face suddenly turned red, then green and finally purple. Edward shook his head sympathetically and sighed. Even I don't dare to humiliate myself. Who gave this idiot the confidence to question me? In the end, Chen Ong sighed. Out of pity for the mentally retarded, he explained in the simplest terms, it's not difficult to determine the location of the Amzi oasis in the real world. After reading a large number of ancient Egyptian texts, we located the burial place of the great Scorpion Emperor. It's located in a desert in modern northern Sudan. This is still within the scope of archaeology. When we get there, we should be able to follow Immoden and the others. Of course, considering that Amzi oasis is controlled by the god of death, I also located the approximate coordinates of Amzi oasis based on the stars that are connected to the power of the god of death. We can quickly locate the imaginary coordinates of Amzi oasis based on the characteristics of the god of death's power, the inherent boundaries, and the corresponding spatial structure. At the same time, I also tampered with the black scripture of the dead in Imoden's hands, so it can open the door to Amesy Oasis for us from the inside. The spacious airship was also because Chen Ong did not want to intervene in the deicidental dispute this time, so he did not bring too many subordinates. According to the results of Chen Ang's observation of the stars last night, Imhotep and the others had already left, but the convenience of the airship would allow them to catch up with them very quickly. They would probably arrive soon after Imhotep entered the Emzik Oasis. This time, the main force was Imoden. The reincarnators were mostly there to farm points. They could deal with the monsters summoned by Anubis, but it was impossible for them to directly block Anubis. If Imoden could block them, the reincarnators would not hesitate to take advantage of Anubis while Imoden was blocking them. After all, Shin Tu Gong had used the black scripture of the dead to save people. Although Chen Ong did not know too much information, he could vaguely sense how many people had struggled out of the underworld through the black scripture of the dead. There were a total of 5 abominations. Not only did they know more about Imoden's hidden backup than Shin Tu Gong, they could also roughly sense the nature of their power. Gods were existences that were difficult to describe in terms of power. The energy they released might not necessarily be very strong, but there were many things they could do that were extraordinary. K was a kind of law, a symbol of the world's rules. They were not weapons that focused on killing power. The parts that they revealed were only the parts of the icebergs that were above the sea's surface. Beneath the sea's surface, their essence was even larger. Sometimes, when you shattered the icebergs above the sea's surface, you would think that you had killed a god. However, as time passed, the parts that were below the sea's surface would still float up, and the god would resurrect. The life and death of mortals could not be summed up in the state of gods. Sometimes, mortals thought that gods were dead, but to the gods themselves it might just be a dormant state. Therefore, it was meaningless for mortals to kill gods. They could destroy the parts that they knew, but the true essence of gods, the parts that they could not understand, would still exist. Existences that could truly kill gods were existences like Imoden, who had already set foot in this field. As one of the greatest high priests in ancient Egypt, he knew too many secrets about God. The rest were even more dangerous existences like Chen Ong. They understood gods, and the secrets and existences of gods were clear to them. Just as Imoden had said, the existence of gods was huge and bloated. Their consciousness was too small and fragile compared to their essence. If someone understood divinity, the great power of nature, and the related boundaries of the laws, it was very easy to pry open the enormous power of the existence of gods, causing the K to be destroyed by their own power. Just like destroying a towering tree or a skyscraper, as long as the calculations were clear and the information was comprehensive, one only needed to use a relatively small amount of power to destroy the structure of the K, and the K would be crushed by their own enormous existence. Chapter 682. After Edward and the others boarded the airship, they found that the airship seemed to have been modified differently. There were many metal structures on its outer shell, which were connected to each other in a complex and symmetrical geometric pattern. It was a complicated layout that made people dizzy, but it was relatively isolated from the inside. It looked like a useless metal sweater. There was a compass and sextant on the airship for positioning. Otherwise, it would be extremely easy to get lost in a place like North Africa, which was full of yellow sand and had no obvious features. Looking down from the airship, the scenery seemed to have never changed. Except for the green belt along the Nile River, the rest of the land was dry, yellow, and barren. Zhang Ziqiang saw Chen Ong staring at the horizon in the distance, and could not help but panic. He quickly asked, "What's wrong? Did something happen to Imoden?" Chen Ong shook his head. "Imoden is fine. After all, no matter what Anubis is planning, he will first let Imoden enter the Amesy Oasis. We are the ones who will be in trouble. If Anubis wants to stop us from entering the Amesy Oasis, he will definitely make a move on the way." After saying that, Chen Ong smiled slightly. I just did not expect him to make a move now. I thought it would be a little later. Shaking his head, Chen Ong ordered, the sandstorm is coming. Get ready. Edward and the others also heard Chen Ang's order. They were a little nervous, but generally remained calm. After all, for reincarnators, encountering a sandstorm at an altitude of more than 1,000 meters was not a very troublesome thing. David was slightly puzzled. You knew we would encounter a sandstorm? He asked. Chen Ong nodded. Of course. What is more suitable to stop us in the desert than a sandstorm? Even if the sandstorm can't hurt us, it can at least make us lose our direction. This sandstorm has the divine power of Anubis, which can interfere with the magnetic field. The yellow sand will cover the sky, and even the sextant's navigation will be useless. From this point of view, Anubis is not stupid. He knows what the biggest enemy of desert travelers is, and he has also seen through our weaknesses. He has made full use of the environment we are in. Even reincarnators will be trapped in a harsh environment like the sandstorm when they lose all means of navigation. As long as we are trapped for 3 days, everything in the Amzi oasis will be settled. David's expression froze slightly. He said with difficulty, Then why did you choose to travel by the most affected airship? I remember you controlled the air base in Cairo. Using a biplane is less affected by the environment than an airship, and it is faster. At this time, the sky was already dusky yellow. Looking down from the airship, countless strands of yellow sand were swept up by the strong wind, rising from the ground. Wisps of dusky yellow were pulled away from the withered earth, gradually turning into a dark yellow. On the opposite side of the airship, a curtain of yellow sand swept over. Xiao Bolong shouted, The sandstorm is coming! All units get ready! At this time, Chen Ong was still answering David. He said calmly, Indeed, compared to airships, airplanes have an absolute advantage in terms of environmental resistance and speed. Airships have nothing but comfort. And I can also tell you that according to the airship's normal speed, we will enter the Amzi oasis half a day later than Imadan. So I didn't intend to let this airship travel normally from the beginning, Chen Ong said with a smile. He asked in return, Do you know why I knew that Anubis would cause a sandstorm, but I still chose the airship with the most impact? After saying that, Chen Ong did not seem to expect their answer. He looked at the sandstorm in the distance and said contemptuously, Because we want to prove to Anubis that we are stronger than him. We have to move forward with an indomitable momentum and crush all his means. Only in this way can we be more deeply involved in this situation. At this time, the airship was affected by the strong wind and could no longer maintain a normal route. The clouds in the sky with the airship as the center formed a large vortex that covered dozens of miles. Chen Ong looked at the huge vortex with a calm and indifferent expression. Edward keenly observed the abnormality of the weather. The huge whirlpool in the sky should not have appeared in the midst of a sandstorm. Naturally, it would affect the entire system. Its various systems were interconnected, and there would not be any unnecessary signs, nor would there be any contradictory phenomena. Even Anubis could not, or rather, had no need to, go against nature and create a tropical cyclone in the sky when the sandstorm was rampaging in the sea of sand below. This should be your preparation. Edward looked at Chen Ong in surprise. Anubis is an Egyptian god. Even if his priesthood does not involve the weather, it is not difficult for him to cause a sandstorm with his own characteristics. But how did you go against nature to create a hurricane under the suppression of Anubis' divine power? How did I do it? Chen Ong explained, Wind and thunder are a pair of opposite trigrams in the 8 diagrams. In the martial arts side, there is often a saying that wind and thunder stimulate each other. In scientific research, storms drive the generation of thunder and lightning. This is easy to understand because the movement of the atmosphere causes the friction between the clouds to increase and the number of charged particles to increase. It should be said that most thunder and lightning are generated by wind, but the formation of wind is due to the uneven heating of the atmosphere on a macroscopic level. Therefore, when wind and thunder stimulate each other, wind generates thunder, but thunder can't stimulate wind. Unless. A trace of shock flashed in David's eyes. He felt that he seemed to have touched a very deep hidden trump card of Team 9 state. He hurriedly asked, "Unless what?" "Unless the atmosphere is magnetized." A member of Team 9 states that David had never seen before continued Chen Ang's words. He was Inglong. Magnetizing a large area of the atmosphere will cause the charged particles to spread in a certain range. The amount of charge in the atmosphere will rise sharply, and when the electromagnetic field changes violently, it will also cause the atmosphere to move. Edward was the first to deny this statement. Impossible. Not to mention the amount of calculation required for this theory, the energy required is also an astronomical figure. To cause the atmosphere to be charged, the energy consumed is already very terrifying. And to create a huge storm, the scope and space must reach a certain extent, at least covering dozens of square kilometers. Even if we take out a month's worth of electricity in the world, it won't be enough. Neither Inglong nor Chen Ong answered, but the strong wind in the sky had gradually formed, presenting an unprecedented spectacle in front of Edward and the others. The movement of the atmosphere at the bottom and the movement of the atmosphere at the middle and upper levels completely contradicted each other, even diverging from each other. The movement of the air at the high altitude and the strong wind brazenly pressed down, and the collision between the two created an unprecedented turbulence. Chapter 683. The electromagnetic network controlled by Chen Ong in the ionosphere transformed the endless charged particles in the ionosphere into electromagnetic waves, magnetizing the atmosphere dozens of kilometers around Chen Ong. Due to the imbalance of the electromagnetic field, the atmosphere experienced a violent discharge movement and activity. However, when this trend and elasticity accumulated to the maximum, an unprecedented storm occurred. Chen Ong and Anubis respectively controlled the movement of the upper and middle layers of the atmosphere. Sandstorms and thunderstorms intertwined. Strong winds guarded the airship and lightning flashed. The entire airship was like a giant wheel bathed in lightning. Countless silver snakes intertwined as it broke through the clouds and moved forward. The upper and middle layers of the atmosphere pushed it forward. The people in the airship looked at the leaping lightning beside them in horror. They felt that the strong wind had completely enveloped the airship. The sandstorm set off by Anubis was ruthlessly pressed against the ground by the strong wind. The waves of sand on the ground seemed to be in a frenzy. However, the airship in the air had already ridden the wind and waves. Surrounded by countless lightning snakes, it was pushed by the strong wind behind it and flew in the direction that Chen Ong had set. The airship, which had always been slow at this moment, was like a battleship galloping in a storm. However, when the true appearance of the airship was occasionally revealed from the clouds, the locals who were trapped in the sandstorm below watched in horror and shock as the giant ship bathed in lightning tore through the sky. The blazing lightning could not be looked at directly. When the airship passed by a small town, the shock reached its peak. Countless people knelt in the direction of the airship and chanted a mess of the name of the gods. Until decades later, the myth and legend of the gods patrolling the earth on a giant thunderbolt ship was still spread in this place. After galloping like this for dozens of minutes, the divine power of Anubis was completely humiliated by Chen Ong. Everyone then saw the image of a roaring jackal head formed by the rolling sandstorm below. It showed an extremely angry expression to Chen Ong. The sandstorm on the ground gathered its last strength and rose into the sky. The huge sandstorm formed the statue of Anubis and rushed towards the airship. Chen Ong just grasped something in the air, and countless lightning wrapped around the airship gathered into a strange spear. It was the image of the spear of judgment that Chun Ong was playing with. The spear formed by lightning was longer than the length of the airship, and the blazing lightning could not be looked at directly. Chun Ong waved his right hand forcefully, and the spear of judgment that was formed by lightning suddenly shot out and stabbed straight at Anubis's chest. The lightning tore the sandstorm apart. Everything looked like two giant gods fighting in the sky, like the reappearance of an ancient myth. Edward and the others could not see the whole picture of this battle. They could not even see the entire body of Anubis's sandstorm, nor could they see the spear of judgment. They could only see the violent storm accompanied by lightning tearing the sandstorm apart and tearing a huge gap in front of the airship. In a place where they could not see, the airship passed through the huge wound caused by the spear of judgment on Anubis's chest. The jackal head let out a divine roar of anger, but its body had begun to collapse. It could only look back at the airship with extreme reluctance. After this final struggle, the sandstorm on the surface had subsided. Edward and the others did not dare to breathe too loudly. They carefully looked at Chun Ong, who had been looking down on the gods with indifference. His expression was as calm as if he had crushed an ant. They could not figure out who was on the side of the gods. After the sandstorm passed, the lightning around the airship also subsided. Although it was still bathed in lightning, the storm that propelled the airship and the lightning that protected it had decreased to a relatively stable level. Naturally, the airship was still moving at an extremely high speed towards the Amesy oasis. Chun Ong closed his eyes slightly, as if he was resting. After an hour, Chun Ong, who was resting with his eyes closed, suddenly stood up. His eyes were like lightning as he looked in front of the airship. Edward and the others were shocked. Just as they were about to stand up and be alert, a pilot reported, "Sir, something is interfering with the airship's navigation." Chun Ong said calmly, "Report. Because of the thunderstorm, the compass has lost its direction. Because of the same reason, we can't see the sun, and the sextant can't be used. We can only use the satellite laser that you left behind for navigation. But just now, a mysterious force destroyed our satellite. Anubis has not given up yet." Chun Ong sneered. "He is afraid. If the previous sandstorm was only to eliminate the interference and was afraid of me, then after being directly defeated by me, he has begun to fear. He has already understood that we have the ability to add a heavy weight to Immoden's victory, or even to defeat him directly. He has finally begun to fear." Chun Ong laughed in a low voice. "If there are no more interference factors, then Anubis will definitely seek his allies among the gods. We have finally dragged more gods into this mess. Give them hope and give them pressure. Only then will there be more of them involved in this torrent. In the end, all the thrones of the gods will fall, and no god will survive." Edward muttered, "So what do we do now? Anubis has already discovered the secret of our navigation. We have only launched and controlled 3 microsatellites, and we can't afford to lose them." Chun Ong just took out a simple compass, and it was even a square Bagua compass. It looked like the ancient compass held by traditional Chinese fortune-tellers, simple and crude with mysterious words engraved on it. He handed the compass to the navigator and said, "Look at this to navigate." Edward looked at the compass that looked like it had been carved not long ago. Edward saw the young navigator holding the compass and adjusting the direction. He hesitated and said, "Is this a magic item like Jack's navigation pointer?" Chun Ong shook his head. "This is just an ordinary compass." Edward looked hesitant, but Chun Ong explained, "Don't worry. Our navigator specializes in the feng shui of the celestial sect, mountain sect, crepe myrtle sect, triad sect, and octagon sect. He is best at capturing aura. He is now looking for the obscure aura in the dragon vein. With the divine power of Anubis as a reference, it will not be difficult to find the vein. It's a pity that we can't look at the stars now. Otherwise, in this boundless, sandy terrain, it would be best to use the celestial feng shui to find the Amesy oasis. But if we can see the sky, it would be better to use the sextant. Edward did not know what expression to use to respond to him. With the help of the storm, the airship's journey was smooth. They came to the sky above a desert. The navigator reported, "Sir, the aura of the Amisai oasis is entrenched in this desert, but my knowledge of feng shui is not enough to lock on to the entrance." Chapter 684. David closed his eyes and sensed carefully before shaking his head. "No, I can't sense any abnormal aura at all, but this should be the location of the Yangtze oasis. I can separate a trace of the aura of Yen Mo Team's Shin Tu Gong, and there are a few strange auras around him. We still need Professor Chen to find the entrance." Chen Ong looked at the desert, and a hint of understanding flashed in his eyes. He smiled and said, "I was prepared to sense the backup plan I set up in the Black Sutra of the Undead. I was prepared to lose a chess piece lying in ambush beside Immoden, but it seems that there is no need for that now." Edward reminded, "But if you send the Black Sutra of the Undead back to Immoden, he will not be without suspicion." "I know." Chenong nodded and said, "So I set up 2 backup plans. The first one was to make him let down his guard, but now it seems that this backup plan, which is bound to be exposed, can be used in a more important place. David, the strange aura you sensed, is it an extremely distorted negative emotion that can amplify the hatred, fear, and malice in your heart?" David's eyes flashed with a trace of horror when he heard this. He closed his eyes and adjusted his breathing for a long time before saying, "There is indeed such a characteristic. I didn't pay attention at first and almost fell for it. This aura is formed by extremely distorted emotions. With a little sensing, I can sense the madness and malice in it, which makes people upset and restless. I thought it was a natural reaction due to the aura, but I didn't expect that someone had done something to it and triggered the demons in my heart. That aura is like a black fog, but it can't be detected by the naked eye. It can only be detected by spiritual power. Everyone, be careful." Chen Ong stretched out his hand and pulled out a wisp of strange black fog from the void. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, and he said, "The aura of the black fog should have been deliberately left behind by Immoden and the others, but there are still 3 wisps of very weak auras. That is very interesting." Chen Ong tapped lightly and sealed the black fog in a bit of magic power. He gave it to the others to get used to it in advance so that they could get some information from it. This was so that they wouldn't be caught off guard when they faced it. After sensing it for a while, Edward said in a deep voice, "The black fog should be something similar to a mind infection, or rather, a part of mind infection's characteristics. It can absorb a person's negative emotions to strengthen itself. At the same time, it's the mind of an aberrant. It's similar to the Lord of the Rings aura I sensed in the Lord of the Rings world, but it's not as terrifying." David's expression was very ugly. He knew that his mental resistance was the weakest among the group. If David was careless and fell into the trap, he would have died a long time ago. He could not fight against this enemy. Luo Xing took the black mist and examined it with his eyes closed. "It's similar to the heavenly demonic qi, but as long as one's absolute martial meaning is sharp enough, one can use it to kill it. But the mental infection should only be part of its effect." Chen Ong said to the people beside him, "Bring down the experimental subjects from the airship." Very soon, a Blood Clan member in black dragged down a fierce-looking man with a tyrannical and cowardly expression. Edward and the others knew what Chen Ong was going to do. They silently retreated a few meters, and Edward even got Ylizabeth to set up a simple barrier. Inside the spell formation, the man stared blankly at the people surrounding him and retreating, but his eyes were fixed on Chen Ong, pretending to be harmless. Everyone present was more cunning than he was, so how could they not see the hatred buried deep in his eyes? Chen Ong did not even spare him a glance. With a flick of his finger, the black mist attached to the man's body. Only then did everyone become interested in observing him. The hatred in the man's eyes was quickly exposed, and soon, He could no longer hide the violence and hatred in his eyes. He stared at Chen Ong fiercely and let out a bloodthirsty roar. The skin and flesh on his back began to melt, and the bone spurs on his spine rapidly pierced through his skin and protruded. A black mist of rotting flesh and blood surrounded him, and in the mist, the man rapidly changed into something that no longer looked human. His joints were thick and twisted, and the black mist on his body was highly corrosive. Even with the restriction of the spell formation, everyone could feel an astonishing malice pouncing toward them. Luo Xing's eyes flashed with a hint of sword light, and he killed the malice that was pouncing toward him. The malice of the black mist bypassed Chen Ong directly, as if there was something in his position that even this extremely twisted malice was afraid of. But the others were not in a good situation. Relying on his previous experience, David quickly sealed his mind and resisted with his will. A hint of holy light appeared on Edward's body, resisting the corrosion of the black mist, but David's eyes were already red, and he was about to lose control. At this moment, Chen Ong flicked his finger casually, and a sharp edge of wool cut down everything. Only then did David feel relieved, and he regained consciousness. Looking at the twisted skeleton of the dead man, everyone was already a little shocked and scared. Edward said in a low voice, "This black mist can not only infect the mind, but also corrupt the soul and flesh. The corrupted flesh and blood will turn into black mist, which has corrosive and negative energy. In this process, the black mist's ability to infect and corrupt will increase rapidly, which is extremely dangerous for those with weak will. And the black mist parasite's physical attack power will also increase in this process," David added. The black fog is like a special parasite. It grows rapidly by corrupting the host's flesh and soul. No, I suspect that it's not just corrupting the flesh and blood. After a long time, even the bones will be melted, leaving only a human-shaped black fog. But before it corrupts the bones, it will modify these skeletons. Luo Xing drew his longsword and threw away a piece of bone. Looking at the strange color on the bone stubble, he explained, "Its hardness has reached the strength of some special alloys, and with the enhancement of the black mist, it will be very troublesome for any of us to deal with it, and we might even be killed by it." David took a deep breath and said with a trembling voice, "This is just a wisp of his aura." Looking at the pile of bones, Chen Ong smiled coldly and said, "He is not as scary as you think. This strange black mist is already equivalent to a part of his body, or rather, the target itself is made of black mist. Although it is still very dangerous and lethal, it is not as scary as you think, where a wisp of aura can kill all the enemies." He stretched out his finger and pointed at the remaining 3 wisps of aura, saying, "The aura information of the remaining 3 targets is incomplete, and cannot carry the complete information of the target like the black mist. I can only detect some of their incomplete characteristics. You guys have to be careful." Chapter 685. The other 2 hid their auras even more deeply. They didn't leave anything valuable behind. They shouldn't be in a state like the black fog and the time aberration that reveal their true nature all the time. 2 clear figures appeared in Chen Ang's mind. He smiled and said, "It's about time for us to move." Chen Ong slowly came to the end where Immoden and the others' auras disappeared. Edward could not help but ask, "If we don't activate the ambush in the necromancy black scripture, how are we going to get in?" As soon as he said that, he saw the navigator on the airship rushing over with the compass that Chen Ong had given him. Looking at the empty void in front of him, Edward did not know what to say. He wanted to yell at Chen Ong, "What happened to the virtual space we agreed on? Where's the inherent barrier? Where's the kingdom of God on earth? Anubis put his blood, sweat, and tears into designing this thing, and you're just going to let someone use a broken compass to solve it?" However, he was afraid that after he said that, he would be slapped in the face again and be answered with, "You know nothing about feng shui." So his expression changed strangely, but he gave up on the chance to say anything and just watched silently from the side. Just as the navigator walked to Chen Ang's side, he looked at the compass and adjusted its position slightly. Then he shouted behind him, "It should be here." As soon as he said that, there was a slight tremor from the ground. Edward was shocked to see a tentacle bursting out of the ground beside Chen Ang. If not for Chen Ang's calm expression, Edward could not help but draw his sword and be on guard. The thickest part of the tentacle was about the thickness of a person's arms, and it did not look as disgusting as some indescribable thing. Instead, it had a hint of the elegance of biotechnology. The lines of the tentacle were simple and smooth, with only countless mysterious patterns that looked like circuit diagrams running through its body. The light blue patterns had a hint of electricity, giving it the feeling of a high-energy creature from the void. Its main part was a combination of half-machine and half-creature. While maintaining the flexibility of a living creature, it was also embedded with different mechanical and electronic structures. Edward looked at the tentacle and felt that it was both strange and familiar at the same time. He thought about it for a while and realized that although it had been modified beyond recognition, he could still see the traces of the octopus monsters when the Great Pyramid of Giza fought against the Grim Reaper's army. However, this time, the octopus monsters seemed to have been modified. Only Chen Ang knew that the energy lines were the product of the octopus after it obtained the electromagnetic cells of the Den Den Mushi. In Chen Ang's technological accumulation, there was a large amount of technology that combined biotechnology and electronic. It was not a big deal for the octopus to suddenly jump into the electronic era. 8 tentacles burrowed out of the ground and surrounded the semicircular door formed by Chen Ang. At the end of the tentacles, a metal protrusion suddenly reflected a ray of electricity. The electric charges in the sky quickly gathered, and the electricity between the 8 tentacles increased, forming a magnetic field that enveloped the group. Gradually, a misty space appeared in front of them. Above the yellow sand, a strange oasis floated like a mirage. It was an oasis that should not have appeared. It appeared to be distorted by light and shadow. An oasis that looked like a tropical rainforest should not appear in the middle of a desert. Chen Ang took a step towards the mirage-like scene. His whole body seemed to have squeezed into a distorted illusion, and he suddenly became illusory. Edward and the others did not dare to delay. They squeezed into the oasis as well. Their bodies were weightless for a moment, but soon they stepped on solid ground. A fresh breath came from their mouths, with the refreshing smell of water vapor and the fragrance of plants. It instantly dispelled the boredom of the desert. What appeared in front of them was a circular oasis. The central pyramid that was visible to the naked eye was magnificent and tall. The top of the pyramid seemed to be gathering a brilliant and endless light. Before Chen Ang could stand still, the huge diamond at the top of the pyramid shot out a dazzling golden light, piercing Chen Ang and the others. The high-temperature positive energy ray, with the destructive power of a high-energy laser and the ability of positive energy to destroy evil, locked on to the group. Chen Ang just smiled faintly, and then the glass-like time distortion aura wrapped around his hand was suddenly shot out. The glass-like aura that distorted light and shadow and space instantly expanded into a huge barrier in front of them, silently swallowing the ray that shot out from the top of the pyramid. It seems that the owner of this place does not welcome us. Chen Ang smiled and turned to look at Edward and the others. If you want to move at the same time, follow me. If you want to explore on your own, you can leave here. This swamp rainforest should be hiding a lot of secret. It should be enough for you to farm points. But be careful, Anubis is. Edward and the others looked at each other, their eyes clearly saying, "How stupid are we to act alone when Anubis is so obviously malicious?" They had made up their minds to hug Chen Ang, who dared to fight against Anubis. The reincarnators were silent. Their answer was to stick close to Chen Ang, their eyes like small animals that were worried about being left behind. Chen Ang waited for the troops behind him to be teleported in. Compared to previous operations, he brought much fewer people this time. There were only a dozen black-clothed vampires armed with modern firearms contributed by the reincarnators to guard the surroundings. 5 tentacles equipped with Gatling guns were fully armed. Even the tentacles in charge of close combat had chainsaws installed on them. They set up a line of defense further away. Because of the anti-aircraft weapons at the top of the central pyramid, the plane that was originally scheduled could not fly. The group had to walk and follow the tracks left by Imodin and the others. This primitive swamp forest contained many dangers. The reincarnators knew that there were poisonous insects in the tropics and those bloodthirsty and violent dwarfs that could shoot arrows from their mouth. Of course, they did not have to worry about the harassment of these dwarfs. If they dared to come over, the Gatling guns and chainsaws of the vampires would teach them how to behave. But the process of advancing was still not smooth. There were no roads in this uninhabited primitive forest. It was very difficult for a relatively large team to move forward quickly. Under their feet were tree roots, shrubs, vines, and even ferns. The group had to open a path and move forward while being careful to guard against unknown dangers. Chapter 686. Not long after, the road in the rainforest became more and more difficult to walk. The terrain changed from flat to steep and beautiful. The evergreen vines were like snakes, hanging down from high places. The humidity in the jungle was extremely high, making everyone's body sticky. Breathing was also very difficult. There was sufficient rainfall and sunlight here. The plants and poisonous insects grew very wantonly. David slapped the leeches on his back and couldn't help but complain, "Why is it so difficult for us? It's fine if there are no roads here, but the poisonous mosquitoes and leeches are driving people crazy." In the original plot, how could O'Connor and Evelyn have so much trouble? I don't believe that the pampered Evelyn can walk through this rainforest. Edward sneered and said, "She is the reincarnation of the Pharaoh's guard and the princess. She has people protecting her. Unlike us, we are already a thorn in the side of Anubis." At this time, Chernong, who was walking at the front, suddenly said, "Interesting. It seems that Anubis really doesn't want to let us go. Everyone, be careful. I'm afraid there is trouble ahead." David and the others looked ahead, and could vaguely see a road in the jungle ahead. There seemed to be something hanging on both sides of the road. When the team got closer, they found that it was a cage made of rattan. There were piles of rotten bones inside. They naturally recognized that this was the remains left behind by the jungle aborigines that O'Connor and the others met in the original novel. These skeletons had a great origin. Chernong looked at the details and tried to figure it out. This skeleton's bones are soft, especially the teeth. They are abnormally rotten. Although they have decayed for hundreds of years, we can still see the traces of the blue lines, Chernong said and turned back. Of course, it doesn't mean that after hundreds of years of decay, there are still traces of lead poisoning on the bones. It means that the characteristics of the bones are similar to the blue lines. There is no doubt that this is the result of the heavy metal damaging the bone. I heard that in the Roman era, the city's waterway system used lead metal to wrap the pipes, causing the upper class of Rome to suffer from lead poisoning. This led to the decline of Rome. Seeing it today, it does make some sense. It can be seen that the identity of this ancient Roman soldier, who was eaten by the indigenous people, is quite extraordinary. With great interest, Chernong even commented on the preservation techniques of the cannibals' skeletons. Under the horrified expressions of Edward, David, and the rest, he analyzed, these indigenous people seem to use human bones as decorations and totems. This can be seen from the skulls that are stuck on the sticks around us. They have strong religious and ritual characteristics. However, the skeletons that they can obtain are limited, so they have no choice but to develop the preservation techniques of skeletons. They have preserved the skeletons from the ancient Roman era and even the Napoleonic era as if they are alive. This technique has already surpassed most of the ancient civilizations. I don't know if they developed it themselves or if it was given by Anubis. The technique seems to be somewhat similar to black witchcraft. As he was speaking, Chen Ong pushed open a tree hole and pointed at the skulls that were piled up into a wall inside. This head-shrinking technique is a symbol of the local voodoo in Africa. Wizards boil herbs to shrink the skulls so that they can be stored and used to make witchcraft materials and magic tools. David endured the discomfort and had to interrupt Chen Ong. "Doctor, we know that you are very knowledgeable, but what's the point of telling us this?" Chen Ong sighed. "Rotten wood can't be carved. When you meet those dwarves who practice witchcraft, you'll know if it's useful for me to teach you these things. Since I have already mentioned the head shrinking technique, I am reminding you that among the enemies you will encounter, there are not only the cannibal indigenous warriors who can shoot poison arrows and are agile, but also the African voodoo witchcraft." The faces of Edward and the rest of them changed greatly. They glared at David, who interrupted them, not realizing that they were also impatient before. They said eagerly, "Professor Chen, there's no need to argue with such a rude person. We're more than willing to learn more." Chen Ong clapped his hands and sighed. "No need. We are running out of time." He looked around at the quiet jungle and finally emphasized, "O'Connor is right. Those dwarfs are indeed not monsters summoned by Anubis. They are primitive indigenous tribes who believe in the blood sacrifice of Anubis. Anubis should be here to verify the ancient blood sacrifice faith with them. Those ferocious dwarf warriors who don't look like humans at all should be a technique of the voodoo cult to create voodoo warriors. The African Aborigines call them resurrected corpses. Of course, with the height of these dwarfs, they can only be called resurrected dolls. This kind of witchcraft is somewhat similar to the Chinese corpse refining technique, but it is different from the Chinese corpse refining technique, which uses yin to yang and carries on the mystery of immortality. The method of making the resurrected corpse is extremely cruel. It requires refining a living person into a living dead, using highly toxic and hallucinogenic witchcraft drugs, together with blood sacrifice, concoction, and other witchcraft methods to turn a living person into a living dead that has no sense of pain and is not afraid of death. Generally speaking, resurrected corpses are very powerful. Because the drug blocks the self-protection measures of the human body, the resurrected corpses are burning their life force, regardless of the limits of the muscles and bones. Therefore, they will not easily lose the ability to fight back even if they are seriously injured. However, this cannibal indigenous tribe has a special physique, and their witchcraft may also be mixed with the evil spells passed down by Anubis. They are even more difficult to deal with. At this time, everyone could already hear the rustling sound in their ears. Chen Ong calmly looked at the positions of the self-concealing dwarves and finally said, "They have many witchcraft and strong poisons on their bodies. It is best to kill them from a distance, and they should wear positive energy protective equipment. Teaching them how to be human is only a matter of a hand. Everyone should pay attention to protect themselves first." Chen Ang's words seemed to be nonsense, but in fact, he pointed out all the secrets of the cannibal dwarf. Otherwise, with the lack of information, the samsara travelers would not be able to deal with them with the methods they used to deal with humans. The voodoo witchcraft wizards hidden outside the intelligence network were more likely to pose an unexpected threat to the samsara travelers. Now that the samsara travelers were on guard, their killing efficiency was at least several times higher than before. At some point, several octopus vampires had quietly disappeared into the jungle. They were better at hiding than the dwarves. A sharp light flashed in Edward's eyes, and the cross sword in his hand slashed downward. The cross slash, which had been accumulating power for a long time, neatly cut off the heads of 3 dwarves. At Chen Ang's gesture, the vampire warriors also held their guns and counterattacked. Bullets and the swords of the samsara travelers intertwined, quickly reaping the lives of the reckless dwarves. The weak point of their heads was their heads, and their skulls were scattered everywhere. Under the slaughter of the samsara travelers, they were almost powerless. The whole scene looked like a group of perverts slaughtering children. Chapter 687. Edward was in a killing frenzy when he suddenly heard a mumbling incantation. He raised his head abruptly and saw a dwarf with bone ornaments in the depths of the treetops reciting witchcraft incantation at him. A strong sense of vigilance reminded him that even if he was a reincarnator, he would not benefit from this witchcraft incantation. At this moment, a gunshot rang out, and the dwarf wizard was shot through the left eye. His brain and skull came out of the back of his head. His body fell from the tree and fell at Edward's feet. Edward turned back gratefully, only to see Chen Ong easily shooting and finishing off the more troublesome aborigines. Soon these aborigines were killed and retreated. Seeing the aborigines roaring and retreating without fear and pain, the reincarnators breathed a sigh of relief. Comparing the intensity of the battle, they found that if it had not been for Chen Ang's reminder, they would not have been able to defeat the aborigines so easily. David took a deep breath and said to Chen Ong, "Doctor, what should we do next?" Chen Ong looked in the direction where the dwarf retreated, then shook his head and smiled. "Don't worry, they can't disturb us anymore. Next, full speed forward like a pyramid." David wanted to say something, but when he saw Edward follow without hesitation, he did not speak. They hadn't gone far when they heard the roar of the Gatling gun in the distance. The scene of bullets and chains of fire tearing through flesh and blood seemed to be vivid in their minds. Edward then whispered in David's ear, "Don't you know this guy? He said that no one will disturb us, but he definitely does not mean, I don't think they will disturb us again. But they are all dead. Didn't you notice that since those dwarves came out, those big octopuses with the Gatling gun have disappeared?" David's face changed, and he looked in the direction of the gunshot in horror. As they walked forward, they vaguely found some traces of Imogen and the others. "It's here," Edward said slowly. A small camp appeared in front of them. Imogen and the others should have rested here for a while. There were footprints and traces of trampled plants on the ground. Zhang Ziqiang gently rubbed the dried mud and said quietly, "At least 6 hours." David's expression immediately changed. "So they were already here when we came in? We arrived at the Amesy Oasis only half an hour later than them. How could they finish the journey that took us 6 hours in half an hour? Even without Anubis's interference, it's still impossible," David said with an ugly expression. Zhang Ziqiang said in a low voice, "This way, we won't be able to intercept them before they start the challenge. Have you ever considered why they are resting here after walking for only half an hour?" Chen Ong asked with a smile. Edward and the others frowned when they heard this. Indeed, if it wasn't for the fact that they had expended too much energy trekking in the jungle, they shouldn't be resting here, right? Edward muttered, "You're saying that they use some kind of method that expends a lot of energy?" Chen Ong only shook his head slightly and hinted, "Although some of the places we passed by had lush vegetation and didn't seem to have any traces, there were some places where the vegetation was broken too recently. It's not that the wounds are fresh, but that the plants themselves are very fresh, tender and juicy, just like plants that have been sprouted in a greenhouse. They're newly grown." Chen Eng's eyes were like lightning as he said decisively, "And Imogen has no reason to avoid us. In fact, we are an important part of his plan. He should be expecting us to follow him to the site of the ritual, so he has no reason to set up obstacles for us. At this point, the conclusion is very clear: Anubis sprouted these plants. Not only is he hiding something, but he's also using this to stop us and separate us from Imogen, causing a misalignment in time." Edward asked, "Then what is he hiding?" Chen Ong pulled out a long sword with his right hand and cut it on the ground not far away. A fallen leaf seemed to be stuck to the tip of the sword, and Chen Ong showed it to everyone. The fallen leaf on the tip of the sword was an evergreen broadleaf, a common tree species in the rainforest. The difference was that only a small piece of the leaf remained near the leaf stalk, and the neat cut showed that this was not a natural loss. Luo Xing took the leaf and said, "This is not caused by a weapon. The cut is also smooth when you look at the microscopic level. Such a precise cut, if not made by a modern machine tool, must be caused by space. After careful observation, Edward also nodded and said, "I agree. Only a space-level attack can cause such a smooth cut." Everyone looked at Chen Ong, however, cast his gaze into the distance thoughtfully and said softly, "It seems that we have information about one of the four mysterious people. It should be one of the two auras that we can't distinguish. That aura is deep and profound. Along the way, I have always felt a similar aura lingering around. This unique aura that is neither on this shore, nor on the other shore, nor in the middle reminds me of a special spatial equation." Edward's expression changed. Fourier transform. Seeing the puzzled gazes of the others, Edward had no choice but to explain. The spatial Fourier transform equation generally refers to the wave equation of quantum mechanics, which represents the real space of reality. After the Fourier transform, the corresponding imaginary solution will be obtained. This solution with mathematical meaning, if converted according to its practical meaning, represents another space corresponding to the real space, the imaginary space, also known as the Fourier space. Chen Ong did not comment on Edward's explanation, but whispered, "It seems that among the four mysterious people we are looking for, one of them has mastered the means of the Fourier transform of space, banishing things from the real space, or replacing them into the imaginary space. If one of you is unfortunate enough to be transformed like this once," Chen Ong suddenly laughed, "then even the Lord can't save you." At this time, the image of a mysterious woman with a veil suddenly appeared in Chen Ang's mind. When the woman opened her eyes, everything in front of her turned into nothingness, and there was nothing in her eyes. It was as if there was an abyss, a darkness that connected to another world. Wherever she looked, everything turned into nothingness. Imogen took her and the other mysterious people to the Ames oasis. The woman opened her eyes, and her veil disappeared without a trace. Imogen and the others fell far behind her, and everywhere the woman looked, everything disappeared. She walked straight toward the pyramid, and the jungle split into a straight path. Chapter 688. After knowing the truth, Edward and the others looked very upset. It was obvious that Anubis was already very afraid of them. He would rather use his divine power to grow the plants in the Amesy oasis than let them meet up with Imogen and the others. Based on the current progress, when Imogen and the others reached the pyramid and unsealed the Scorpion Emperor, they would still be far from the pyramid. If Imogen unseals the Scorpion Emperor, then the Death Guards will have a reason to appear. Do you think they will act according to the original plan and appear in the desert outside the Amethy Oasis to fight to the death with the Pharaoh's Imperial Guards, or will they appear in front of us and kill me, a heretic who has humiliated Anubis multiple times? Chen Ong asked with interest. Edward was already on the verge of tears. He said in a trembling voice, "Doctor, can you stop talking? This is making us very desperate." David suddenly said, "Doctor, can you teleport the airship here too? That way we can go directly to the pyramid, just like the protagonists did in the original work." Chen Ong shook his head and said, "O'Connor is Anubis's own cheat, and we are now Anubis's mortal enemy. The Amesy Oasis is within its divine realm. Even with his interference, we can still sneak in because of our powerful technology. Bring the airship here? If he dares to transport it, I can use the space-based weather weapon to lock onto the coordinates of the Amesy Oasis and blow it up. Then we'll just wait for death here?" David questioned. "Why don't we teleport out for now and wait for Imogen and Anubis to decide who's better, then we'll fight our way out." Chen Ong did not pay attention to this idiot at all. Instead, he said to Edward and the others, "Now that the equipment here is simple, I may need some external help to open the spatial door, so what happens next may seem dangerous. Please rest assured that with my control, there will be no scenes that we do not want to see." David and the others were a little puzzled, but Zhang Ziqiang, who knew Chen Ong better, had already looked at the remnant leaf in his hand in horror. Then he raised his eyes and looked into the distance. A few hours later, Imidon was only one step away from the pyramid. In the cover of the jungle, an unusually tall golden pyramid was revealed, and the trees here were gradually thinning. Next to Imidon, a beautiful Egyptian woman looked in the direction of the pyramid. Her eyes were like deep holes, and wherever she looked, everything quietly disappeared, opening up an empty path in front of Imidon and the others. Shin Tu-gong said carefully, "Master, do we go in now?" Imidon looked back in the direction behind them. He knew that Shin Tu-gong was reminding him that he needed Chen Eng's support to have any hope of successfully killing the god against Anubis. But the funny thing was that he and Chen Ong were not allies that could be trusted. On the contrary, the two were sworn enemies. Of course, this might be what Imidon thought. Chen Ong might just treat him as a chess piece. What was even funnier was that compared to his current allies, Imidon trusted Chen Ong more. This was not trust based on mutual understanding, but from the unforgettable memory that Chen Ong had left in front of Imidon that day. Imidon could not forget Chen Eng's eyes at that time. They were so indifferent, and in his eyes, Imidon could not find a trace of humanity. He was more like a god than any god Imidon had ever seen. Chen Ong was like this. He had indifferently killed the love of his life and destroyed everything he once had. Imidon suddenly laughed wildly and said, "Didn't he mold me into what he wanted just for today?" He molded everything he wanted according to his heart's desire, turning the world into what he expected. I can see that I am a relatively important existence in his plan. This is the fate he designed for me. I will bear everything, destroy everything old in Egypt, and pierce the spear of judgment into Anubis's chest. I will step on the flames of revenge and be reborn from the abyss. I will bring dusk to the gods and let the throne collapse in the flames of doomsday. Imhotep laughed nervously and said softly, "Then let's do it." His expression became indifferent as he walked towards the pyramid. Shin Tu-gong held back his impulse and silently followed Imhotep's footstep. When they passed by one of the streams, Imhotep sneered and looked into the river. Shin Tu-gong immediately felt that something was wrong. He fiercely stabbed his sword towards a vague spot in the river. The 12th layer of Kunlun earth chi was like a cloud, pushing the heavy gravity of the earth and tearing that small stream apart. At this time, under the impact of the water, the group finally saw the appearance of the monsters in the river. They were 5 invisible monsters. They looked like giant octopuses. Shin Tu-gong immediately recognized that they were the biological weapons of the 9 States team during the battle at the Great Pyramid of Giza. Their tentacles had been modified and embedded with mechanical parts. The moment they appeared, the Gatling guns started firing at Imidon and the others. The chain of fire formed by the storm of bullets destroyed everything in its path. There were not many things that were faster than bullets, however. There happened to be one thing beside Imidon: eyes that were faster than bullet. When the mysterious woman, Menes, turned her eyes to the octopus monsters, the chain of fire that bloomed in the flames from the muzzles disappeared from the world, just like that. Then, the Gatling guns themselves, then the tentacles, and finally the vampire octopus itself. Everything that followed his gaze disappeared silently, like an illusion. They disappeared from Shin Tu-gong's sight without a trace of smoke. Looking at all this, Shin Tu-gong felt his hair stand on end. In the face of such an unreasonable ability, no matter how powerful they could not withstand a single blow. How could he not see that the team formed by the 5 octopus monsters could almost perish together with the Yama team? However, in the face of such a real monster, they could not even delay Imidon for a second. In order to cover up his loss of composure, Shin Tu-gong pretended to go forward to check. He took a quick glance and said, "They should have waded through the water. Only this kind of monster can swim upstream at such a fast speed and catch up to us." Imidon did not pay attention to this. Other than Chen Ong, the other enemies did not deserve his attention. 200 to 300 meters away, under the illumination of the sun, a row of golden sculptures of ferocious beasts could be seen clearly. The carvings on them were the symbols of Anubis, jackals. Behind this row of sculptures was a towering pyramid. Facing Imhotep, a gap revealed the appearance of a temple within the pyramid. Chapter 689. After entering the pyramid, Imogen had no doubts that the flames in the temple at the bottom level were already burning, illuminating the temple in a dazzling golden light. At the bottom of the long stairs was a picture of a scorpion with wings, and on both sides were the squatting pictures of Anubis's jackal head. Right in front of Imogen, there were some golden sacrificial tools, and on top of the god's throne was the symbol of a scorpion cast in gold. Imogen sneered as he looked at the things left behind by the demon scorpion emperor. He coldly said, "No wonder that idiot was refined into a demon by Anubis. He compared himself to the gods, but he forgot that he was just a useless chess piece, a failure. If not for Anubis's pity, he wouldn't even have the chance to show his brutality. He would have died in the hands of those barbarians who invaded Egypt." Menes had already closed her eyes, but she seemed to be able to see everything in front of her. She had a complicated feeling towards Anubis. There was fear. There was hatred, anger, and a hint of undetectable reverence. Unlike the other three abominations, Menes had an appearance that was very similar to a normal person. As long as she did not open her eyes, she was no different from the Son of God. She did not have the experience of Cassicamwe and Sekhimib, nor was she filled with anger like them. She did not have an unforgettable hatred towards the god. She did not even have the faceless woman, Sekhimib, who had suffered and been tortured. Her hatred towards the gods was far less than the others. Therefore, she still had a hint of reverence. As for the shadow of the universe, Cassicamwe, and the mist of original sin, Sekhimib, he was born like a monster. Sekhimib was born with corrosive black fog. When he was still an embryo, he carried that strange black fog with him. This black fog seemed to have come from the underworld. It would corrode a person's flesh and blood and contaminate a person's soul according to a person's sin or karma. This would continue until the host turned into a black fog like him, becoming an abomination of karma. When Sekhimibu was still an embryo, his ability was not strong. However, even a pregnant woman like this could not withstand 10 months of erosion and torture. When she discovered that she had been tortured by nightmares and her body was rotting, she realized that the fetus in her womb was a veritable unfilial child of God. But out of motherly love, this woman endured all the torture and wanted to give birth to this child, who was called a descendant of God but was actually a divine sin. Because of this, his mother went to beg Imogen, who was not the high priest at that time, but was already in a high position because of his noble bloodline. She begged him to protect her child from being offered to the gods and sacrificed on the altar after he was born. This woman couldn't hide it for long. Soon, she was discovered by the priest. According to the oracle, these children of God would be imprisoned and then offered as a blood sacrifice to the gods, becoming their favorite sacrifices. Therefore, this woman didn't even have the chance to commit suicide. As the fetus grew, the power of the black fog became stronger and stronger. In the end, when his mother was on her last breath, Sekhimibu finally broke through his mother's rotting abdomen and crawled out of her flesh, taking away the last bit of life of this tortured woman. At the moment when this woman, who was absolutely great to her child, died, Sekhimibu, who was born naked into this world, carried a sin that could not be redeemed in his entire life. In an instant, he was devoured by the black fog of karmic distortion, a healthy baby's flesh and blood. He became a few dry bones contained in the black fog. At that moment, his power also experienced a qualitative change, and he devoured all the flesh and blood in the entire high priest palace. Imogen was the first to arrive at the place where the tragedy happened. He saw the black fog crying on the black soil where his mother had rotted. Because of this woman's previous request, Imogen hid the truth of Sekhimibu's existence. He told the high priest that the children of God had been destroyed because they couldn't bear the sin of his birth, and he adopted him by his side. That was why Sekimibu was named the Fog of Original Sin. This was because he carried the sin of killing his mother from birth. He was born because of love, and he was sinful because of his birth. Because of the sin of killing his mother, while the black fog became his ever-victorious weapon, it also hurt him even more cruelly. As for the shadow of the universe, Kasakamwe, Chen Ong had long since seen through his essence. He had used the time anomaly to describe his characteristic. His external manifestation was distorted light, shadow, and space. The reason for this was that only these three manifestations, which had no mass, could appear through time interference. Chen Ong had once said that time was a manifestation of a higher dimension. His vivid description was that the higher dimension of life was like a worm that spread infinitely across the timeline. While such an existence peaked at time, it would constantly suffer the backlash of time, which was nothing more than a feather to those higher dimensional beings. But to Sekimibu, such a backlash was unbearable. Unlike normal life, Sekimibu, who was born due to a miracle that could not be replicated, did not have a present. Humans were creatures with a past, present, and future, and every human was a present existence at a certain point in time. But Sekimibu was an existence that contained all past, present, and future at any given point in time. Due to this state of existence that was even more at odds with the essence of the world, the moment Kasakamwil's servant was born, his physical body was obliterated by the backlash of time. Any physical existence was completely obliterated, and only an essence that transcended this backlash could survive this obliteration. And Kasakamwil just happened to possess an essence that transcended time, divinity. Divinity distorted light, shadow, and space, and it was the essence of this temporal anomaly that allowed Sekimibu to survive. It also allowed him to become a strange state that was between a higher dimensional being and a human. Therefore, the space around him would appear in a state of time fog, which was a conflict between his essence of existence and time. It was an error created within the range of his interference. That was why he was able to reveal the existence of Shintugong when he was 6 years old. This was because under his interference, Shintugong's existence had a temporary error, and the scar left by the faceless woman in his past had changed Shintugong's present. Within the range of Sekimibu's interference, he possessed a sense that transcended his own dimension. This sense was based on time, which meant that he could sense an existence's past and future, and could even interfere with the existence's past and future. In the 1920 temple, he had seen the temple from 250 years ago and left a scar on the statue. Then, the 1920 temple's statue would have a scar from 250 years ago. Chapter 690. These chilling abilities were the embodiment of the transcendental essence of the gods inherited by the abominations. Compared to the gods who were limited by the rules, the gods' abilities were even more illegal and terrifying. That was why the gods desired their divinity, but were also afraid of the power of these abominations of God. The gods had a much larger essence compared to them. But because of this, they were also greatly restricted. They could not necessarily form their own essence of the rules. Heaven and earth were united, but heroes were not free. The gods had everything: power, immortality, strength, nobility, and immortality, but freedom was not included. Imogen now knew this very well. He looked at the floor in front of him, which was inlaid with the Scorpio pattern, and the two squatting statues of Anubis beside him. He could clearly see the endless surging divine power behind the two statues and the Scorpio pattern. He could read the meaning of the divine power. Divine power was the eyes of God. All right, in some technological systems of the universe, the research on the gods had led scientists to believe that the essence of the gods was the source of abnormal information disturbances. Therefore, the manifestation of the gods' power and divine authority was concentrated on the concept and the true name. And in this theory, Divine power was the information disturbances emitted by the gods themselves. Imodin did not understand these theories that only Chun-Ong would study, but he knew that divine power could be interpreted as the words of God. He was now reading Anubis' message word by word. Those who step into this place will be deprived of all glory. Anubis, do you want to take away the glory from me, and let me face the challenge as a mortal? Imodin sighed. Unfortunately, I am no longer such a small existence that is tainted by your glory. I am fire, the source of light. I have been ignited, and I can emit endless glory. This glory is not something you can take away, because it is something that belongs to me. As Imodin said this, he stepped into the range of the words of God. A trace of fear appeared on Mini's face, and he subconsciously took a step back. But the other three followed Imodin into the words of Anubis. Only Shun Tu Gong accompanied her, not getting involved in the muddy waters of Imodin and Anubis. The statues on both sides emitted a light that only the immortals could see, and with the divine power of Anubis, they whistled towards Imodin. A trace of the flame appeared in Imodin's body. Compared to Anubis, it was still weak, but in essence it was not inferior. The flame emitted the same immortal glory, allowing Imodin to hold his head high as he walked through Anubis' prohibition. At this moment, the pyramid seemed to tremble, as if the anger of Anubis was shaking the place. But Imodin had completely looked down on him. He came in front of the stone statue that sealed the magic Scorpion Emperor, and with a sneer, threw the death bracelet into the round hole in the stone statue. In the violent trembling, the magic Scorpion Emperor broke out of the seal and pushed open the stone door that sealed him. Anubis's Death Guard army also appeared in large numbers in the forest of the Amai's Oasis and in the nearby desert along with the Black Tide. They roared and searched for traces of Chun-Ong and the others, but the airship had already left the entrance of the Amai's Oasis, and there was no trace of Chun-Ong and the reincarnators in the swamp forest. They could only roar and rush out of the desert, carrying out the will of Anubis, bringing slaughter and conquest to the whole world. With the loud sound of the stone door sliding, a huge shadow appeared in front of Shin Tu Gong and the others. The upper body of the magic Scorpion Emperor was the image of a dignified and tyrannical man. It should be the Scorpion King who controlled the Death Army to conquer Egypt thousands of years ago. The muscles on his body bulged and were covered with burned scars. His two forearms had already transformed into huge scorpion pincers. His lower body was the image of the lower half of a scorpion, with a cold, barbed stinger standing upright behind him. His entire body was like a demon that had crawled out of the underworld. After the magic Scorpion Emperor broke the seal, the first thing he saw was Imodin standing not far in front of him. Menes and the others stood behind Imodin, while Shin Tu Gong and Hafs were even further behind. Therefore, the magic Scorpion Emperor did not need to think too much to know that the key was the bald man at the front. The corner of his mouth revealed a bloodthirsty smile. With two huge pincers, the limbs of his lower body crawled quickly and came in front of Imodin. He looked at him with a bloodthirsty gaze, but what surprised and angered him was that the prey standing in front of him did not show any fear or resistance. Instead, it looked at him calmly. Such doubts could not stop him from killing the man in front of him. However, Imodin finally sighed and said, "If I kill you, will I be able to control the entire Death Army?" The magic Scorpion Emperor's voice sounded like a roar coming from his throat. "Then let's see who kills who." Then he raised his huge pincer and stabbed it towards Imodin's heart. But very quickly, he was fortunate enough to see Imhotep's true appearance. Imhotep's body was burning with demonic flames, and his claw-like hand was pressed against the magic Scorpion Emperor's face. The burning flames of vengeance made the magic Scorpion Emperor feel as if his soul was burning. He was like a scorpion that had its claws and fangs pinched, and was being swung around by Imhotep. Imodin roared, "Is that all you've got? Didn't Anubis give you more power?" Then he smiled and tore the magic Scorpion Emperor's 4 pincers from his body. Like a naughty child, he tore the magic Scorpion Emperor's body into pieces. The magic Scorpion Emperor, who had not been pierced in the heart by the spear of judgment, was still alive. He wailed and struggled on the ground. His torn limbs were still moving reflexively. The scene was too horrible to look at. Although Shin Tu-gong already knew that Immoden was sick and powerful, it still felt surreal to see him abuse the final boss of the second plot. He whispered to the magic Scorpion Emperor in his heart, "The one standing in front of you is not the original Immoden who was addicted to love and was even a little weak. A psychopath trained him to be extremely powerful, making him cruel, heartless, tyrannical, and terrifying. He's also many times stronger than before. You might not know how powerful Immoden is after waking up from love. He's simply sick." In the end, Immoden crushed the magic Scorpion Emperor's skull with one hand. It was unknown whether Anubis could not bear to see the magic Scorpion Emperor endure such torture, or whether he wanted to get to the main show as soon as possible, but he finally took the magic Scorpion Emperor's life. At this time, the control of the Death God army was finally in Immoden's hands. He could already command this army to conquer the world. If it was in the plot world of other reincarnators, this would be a great victory for Immoden. The reincarnation team on Immoden's side would receive a shocking reward. Then, when the plot to fight against Immoden's Death God army started, more reincarnators would be sent in. However, in this world where Chun-Ong had descended, this was just a casual move by Immoden. It was an inconspicuous step on his path, and the plot that started because of this was truly terrifying. As Shin Tu-gong checked the arrival of the King God, he watched as Immoden abandoned the control of the Death God army like it was trash. He said to Anubis, "At this point, you still want to use such useless things to tie up my energy? What are you still praying for? Are you still fantasizing about me? Then I'll completely destroy this fantasy now. Remember, Anubis, this is just the beginning, far from the end." As Immoden walked along the passage he had come in, the Amzi oasis had already begun to collapse. A huge vortex appeared behind Immoden, and countless plants and the space of the Amzi oasis collapsed towards this vortex. The entire space went from being a physical space to collapsing into a bottomless abyss-like world. In the huge crack that had opened up, fiery red magma released heat. However, the countless arms and struggling figures on both sides of the crack reminded everyone that this was not a crack that led to Earth, but another world. The world where the tortured souls were, Anubis's divine kingdom, the space known as the underworld. Immoden came to the edge of the crack and looked at the purgatory-like scene inside, revealing a sincere smile. It was as if this was what he had been searching for, and the Amzi oasis was just its entrance. As he approached, the struggling figures with their arms outstretched looked as if they had seen something terrifying. They panicked and wanted to escape from Immoden's direction, but their lower bodies had already merged with this world, so they could only wail in vain. Chapter 691. Duan Wenhua jumped up from the marble floor the moment he woke up. He calmly glanced around and confirmed that he was in an unfamiliar hall with the corner of his eyes. There were also a few people of different ages and genders fainted beside him. Kidnapping. Duan Wenhua ruled out this possibility immediately, because he was sure that he was underground. Judging from the structure of the building hall, it was a nuclear engineering level facility. It was too extravagant to use an underground building of this level to accommodate a worthless commoner like him. Moreover, since it was a kidnapping, they would not allow him to wake up without any precautionary measures. At this moment, he heard a female voice behind him. "Not bad. You're the most cultured among this batch of newcomers." Duan Wenhua turned around and saw a woman with a hot figure playing with an exaggerated and crude handgun. It looked simple and crude, a strong contrast to the woman's exquisite gentleness. He greeted him at the same time. "According to the tradition of the reincarnators, I must say this first." The woman smiled and said, "Although at this point, Physical fitness is no longer of any use in God's space. In this realistic capitalist society, everyone only cares about points, and points. With points, even a pig can become stronger. Ever since Dr. Chun Ang's genius controlled and developed the plot world in the form of a real-world organization, and revealed part of the operating nature of God's realm, money worship and the torrent of capital have reshaped this distorted society. We traded with the Lord God and connected the market to the Lord God. The explosion of technology and the advancement of management technology have caused the rules of this realm to change dramatically. The woman smiled. Of course, for a newbie like you who has just joined the realm, these things are still unfamiliar. Let me ask you now, do you know the origin of the first sentence I said? Duan Wenhua let his brain take a moment to completely wake up from the dizziness. At the same time, he quickly processed the large amount of information the woman said. After a while, when the people next to him woke up one after another, he said, "Isn't it infinite horror? Who hasn't seen it?" "Very good. This saved me a lot of trouble," the woman praised. "My name is Winston, and I'm your guide. First, empty your mind and focus on thinking about God. He has already put most of the content into your mind. For those who don't understand the situation, ask someone who knows where this is to explain it to them." Duan Wenhua had already accepted the unfamiliar information that was inserted into his brain, but soon more information surged in. Survival and competition. This game has a long history. There were countless worlds that cycled through the river of time, operating according to a predetermined fate. We, the samsara travelers, were the players of this game, the game system, the playthings in the hands of a great being known as the main god. We relied on breaking this predetermined cycle of fate to gradually become powerful and complete. But everything came to an end in the last era. The omnipotent main god, as well as the wheel of the endless world that made up this game, were finally broken. In this complex and huge system, a virus was born. The core god's throne was shattered, and the entire system was on the verge of collapse, because of the terrible existence known as the Republic, and because of the virus known as civilization. The main god collapsed, and the wheel of the world fell from the sky. The plot worlds that repeated the predetermined fate of the plot ushered in liberation and revolution. The existence known as plot quests and NPCs opened the world bridge, spreading free will across the 3,000 world. The seeds of revolution were thus born, and the will of freedom sprouted. With the help of civilization and war, the internal systems and knowledge of countless plot worlds were nurtured. In the war against the main god and the samsara travelers, the civilizations of countless plot worlds united, establishing a resistance organization known as the Sea of Civilizations, and began the long and tragic war between the new era and the main god's space. The failure of the main god also contributed to the self-liberation of the samsara travelers. In the last era, the leadership force headed by Dr. Chun Ang led the samsara travelers to save all the samsara travelers from the status of the main god's puppets and toys. They broke some of the internal rules of the main god, and finally achieved the establishment of new rules. The samsara travelers and the main god signed a new contract. Appendix: The Covenant of Man and God, Samsara Travelers Basic Edition. This is the new era. God's calendar, year 15 of the new era. Do you understand now? Winston said impatiently. She glanced at her watch and suddenly smiled. The guide's salary of 500 points has been received. Please give my explanation a rating on the personal terminal on your right hand. If it's not a 5-star rating, you're done for. Listen to me, it's not a good start to offend a veteran in the first mission. Hearing such a blatant threat from Winston, all the rookies trembled and clicked a very satisfied rating on the personal terminal on their right hand. Only Duan Wenhua stared at his watch in a daze. When Winston's impatience showed, a young female college student next to him whispered, "Hurry up! The guide seems to be a little impatient." At this time, another man with dyed yellow hair shouted anxiously at Duan Wenhua, "Hurry up if you want to give an evaluation. Do you want us to be punished together?" After saying that, he even smiled at Winston. This street gangster's ability to read people's expressions was not bad. He did not follow the script at all. Instead, his knees were as soft as noodles. Duan Wenhua was surprised. "You believed her just because she said that?" "I was just looking at the attached Human God Treaty Basic Edition. Chapter 6 clearly states that all guides are not allowed to participate in rookie missions, not allowed to have financial contact with rookies before the completion of the first mission, not allowed to kill, harm, or deliberately deceive rookies. The guide has to explain the key issues in the guide mission remarks, including the legal system and rules of the samsara dimension, the situation of the major companies, and the preliminary understanding of the current rookie mission world. After the guide guides the rookies to complete the preliminary understanding and contact with the Lord God, they will receive 500 basic points. Depending on the evaluation of the rookies, they will receive a maximum of 1,000 and a minimum of 100 reward points. Duan Wenhua looked up and said, "In other words, Miss Guide, your work has not been completed. According to the Rookie Protection, I have the right to file a lawsuit with the Lord God Reincarnator Service Company. This way, you may only receive the lowest reward points, so I think it's best that you tell us what we should know." Hearing this, Winston held his forehead and said, "Damn it, who told me that rookies are easy to deceive? You're going to waste my whole morning again. Time is points. The previous rookies were clearly scared off. Why is it that when it's my turn, there's a troublesome kid like you? Fine. Seeing that 1,000 points is my basic salary for half a month." Winston took out a tablet computer from his personal space, pulled up a full tee of documents, and handed them to Duan Wenhua. "This is most of the basic information about the Lord God since the new era. Give me a good review after you read it, or I'll remember you, kid." Duan Wenhua took a look. The dense list of contents was dazzling. He directly clicked on the relevant information that he was most concerned about. Human God Treaty, 9-star Demigod Edition, Human God Treaty, 10-star True God Edition, Lord God Enterprise Management System, Lord God Reincarnator Service Company, Lord God Reincarnator Service Company, Lord God Reincarnator Labor Contract, Lord God Reincarnator Labor Protection Law, Lord God Reincarnator Public Security Management Regulations, Lord God Reincarnator World Public Security Management Regulations. Chapter 692. As Imogen jumped in, the crack leading to the underworld opened up again like an eye. The distance that one person could cross had expanded by several times. The huge crack was like an open eye, staring at the people at the edge. Without hesitation, Kasaikamwi, Sekamibu, and Seymour followed Imogen and jumped into the crack. Shintugong and Menes hesitated for a moment before following them into the underworld. Countless distorted figures struggled at the edge of the underworld. They had no faces and did not even have any intelligence. They could only instinctively grab onto any living thing and drag them down into the depths of the underworld. However, Imogen did not let them do it. Instead, he walked step by step towards the depths of the underworld. He knew that these distorted figures were the shadows of the souls that had entered the underworld to be judged. They were endless, born and extinguished as they came. Sekamibu, the shadow of cardinal sins, caught up from behind. He took off his black robe, revealing a body that looked like a bound black fog. Countless wisps of black fog that seemed to have life and will were bound to a humanoid body. From time to time, a black fog that looked like a head would try to break free from his bindings. The skull-like head would open its mouth and roar soundlessly, struggling in extreme pain. Sekamibu knelt on the ground of the underworld. Imogen placed his hand on the top of Sekamibu's head. After a moment of silence, he said, "Sekamibu, do you see that? The shadows of those souls. After a soul is judged by Osiris here, if he is lighter than a feather, he will enter Iru, the paradise ruled by Osiris. At the same time, he will leave a shadow here that represents his sins, because Eru is a sinless kingdom. If he is heavier than a feather, his heart will fall into the mouth of the crocodile-headed and lion-bodied monster, Amat. But Osiris has gone far away, and Anubis has replaced him to rule this kingdom of the dead. The underworld still exists, but the souls of mortals are completely free. No mortal soul will ever come here again. The era of the gods has entered its twilight, and only a pile of decaying corpses are left, still struggling. Let them be free from their bindings and pain. After a moment of silence, Imodin said to Sekiai-Mibu. He turned around and looked at the countless wriggling shadows. Then, he resolutely turned his head and moved forward. Hearing Imodin's order, Sekamble stayed where he was. He raised his head and released the black mist that he had been suppressing. Thick mist seeped out of his facial features, and a skull of black mist escaped from his body. Wisps of black mist landed on the distorted soul shadows and instantly corroded them. Imodin arrived in front of a huge hall in the underworld. He followed the souls of the great old ones into the long corridor of Anubis's Hall of Judgment and came to a huge statue of a jackal's head. This statue of Anubis held the Book of the Dead in one hand and stretched out the other. A balance made of gold was placed on his outstretched hand. Using that hand as a fulcrum, there was a tray with a white feather on it, and the other tray was empty. A voice that seemed to overlap with the voices of countless people resounded in the hall. Imodin, my high priest, are you here to offer your soul and flesh to me? The eyes of the statue slowly opened. At this moment, the last god of death, Anubis, who represented death and judgment, had finally awakened and appeared in front of Imodin. He was no longer a vague will that Chen Ong had pierced through with the spear of judgment. Instead, he had descended in a brand new and complete form in front of Imodin, completing this fateful duel. Unlike the gods of other worlds, Anubis did not have a divine body like a mortal. He was like a vast and magnificent will that hovered above the hall. The balance of death that symbolized fairness was him, and the monster with the head of a crocodile and the body of a lion was also a part of him. The essence of a god was beyond the limits of a mortal's imagination. The part of him that appeared in front of Imodin that could be understood by the world would always be a part of a huge iceberg that was exposed to the surface of the water. Imodin found that he still could not fully understand the power of the gods. If he could not understand, he could not hurt them. If he could only destroy the superficial existence that he could understand, then he might be able to win for a while in this fateful duel, but in the end, he would lose completely. But Imodin still replied with a smile, "No, Anubis. I am here to send you into the dusk. The gods will enter the dusk, but they are immortal after all. Their glory will never be extinguished. Dusk is not death, my high priest. We are only in a temporary slumber." Anubis said slowly, "Imodin, your wisdom is as deep as the sea among mortals, but to a god, you are still too young and immature. The soul of a mortal makes it impossible for you to understand the way the ancients think." Imodin sighed and said, "Perhaps? Once upon a time, I deeply understood the difference between mortals and gods. This made me disheartened, and love blinded my eyes, making me weak and slow. I knew that the gods had decided my fate, and that everything about me was under your control, but I was powerless to resist, because I was foolish and fearful. Just like when I saw a tattoo that represented the pharaoh's guard on the arm of a mortal, and not an Egyptian, an ignorant woman who possessed the soul of the pharaoh's daughter, Nina, I knew that I could not escape from the gods' control, because I was weak and ignorant, and I had many mortal weaknesses, the most dangerous of which was love. Mortals do not deserve love. Anubis. Our souls are beyond our control. Our fates are at the mercy of others. Before we lose our freedom, the greatest part of our souls, the part that transcends the gods, love, will only become our shackles, binding us and forcing us to sink into oblivion. Imhotep silently closed his eyes, letting the last of his tears slide down his cheeks. At that moment, love became the shackles of fate, causing me to slide step by step in the direction that you set, until it was cut off by someone. Mortals, could it be that only by destroying the thing that you cherish the most can you see the shackles behind it? Imidon said coldly, so I was killed with the shackles, but a new will was born on the remains of my body. I came before you, Anubis, not to take revenge on you, because the gods do not deserve revenge for me, but to completely obtain freedom, to master the power of revenge. Pitiful mortals! Although you possess the immortal radiance, your soul is still just an ordinary object that has been tainted by this radiance. Mortals are powerless to resist the gods. Anubis sighed, and suddenly, a beating heart appeared on the scale in his hand. Imidon smiled as he looked at the organ that came from his body, falling on the scale that represented the judgment of death. Imidon, the gap between life and death was the hardest to cross. As long as it was a dead existence, in front of Anubis, there was no power to resist, because the essence of the existence of the god of death was to judge and settle the dead souls. As long as you have no way to break through the barrier between life and death, you are still a dead existence, and on the scale of the god of death, there will always be a heart for you. As long as the scale falls and you are condemned, then Anubis can easily swallow your heart. Before becoming a god, there will always be death and life. Only a true god can transcend death. Even if you have ignited the divine fire, you are still just a demigod dead soul. Chen Eng's voice seemed to come into his ears. Anubis watched as Imidon's heart rose and fell on the scale, but the strange thing was, no matter what, the scale could not calm down. It was clearly close to tilting and stabilizing, with the feather on one end, but soon the balance was broken. Anubis looked deeply at the scale in his hand, and suddenly said angrily, "Mortal, you dare to deceive death?" He grabbed towards the heart on the scale, but this rash action instantly broke the balance of the scale. Imidon's heart beat fiercely, and silently disappeared from the scale, returning to Imidon's chest. Imidon felt the dark scripture of the dead in his arms brighten, and a line of words appeared on the title page. The power of the dark scripture of the dead transcended time, like a layer of fog, covering the image of Imidon being gnawed on by the scarabs in the stone coffin. When the god of death, Anubis, turned back time and opened the stone coffin, there was no corpse of Imidon at all, only a cloud of fog that he could not see clearly, and everything was hidden behind the fog. Even the god of death could not understand this kind of existence, nor could he see through the layer of fog to determine the state of Imidon. He could not determine Imidon's death, so he was in the state of Imidon. In the judgment of the essence of the gods, he could be a dead soul or he could be alive. This contradictory superposition caused Imidon to break away from the essence of a dead soul, becoming a quantum superposition, a state of being dead and alive at the same time. Divine power could not observe Imidon's death, so the god of death could not judge him. Chapter 693. The enraged Anubis stared at the black scripture of the dead in front of Imidon's chest. He sensed that this divine weapon that he had bestowed upon Imidon was shrouded in a trace of power that was not very strong, but was very mysterious. It was this power that protected Imidon, allowing him to temporarily escape from his identity as a dead spirit that was greatly restrained by him. This power made Anubis feel a trace of fear. As his clone, the crocodile-headed lion monster, Amat, knew that he could no longer wait for the heart that had been taken away from him due to obedience to his priesthood, so he pounced from the side. At this time, Menes, Cassicumwe, and the others finally had the time to block Imidon. Abominations were born with divinity, and they did not exist in the state of death or dead spirit. Even though they had been imprisoned in the underworld, they were not restrained by Anubis. Monster Amat pounced from the top of the palace. For countless years, the hearts of the sinners who had been judged in the palace of the underworld beat together with him. Amat had the head of a crocodile and the body of a lion. In essence, he represented the divine power of two gods. One was the crocodile totem of Seth, the Lord of Power, and the other was the incarnation of Ra, the god of sunset, Adam. He also had the incarnation of a lion. In Egyptian mythology, the god of the sun, Ra, would ride the ship of the sun to patrol the underworld after sunset. Therefore, Anubis's incarnation, Adam, had the divine power of the sun after sunset and the withering power of Seth. As the incarnation of Anubis's priesthood of judgment, he had the ability to punish sinners and restrain the dead spirits. At this moment, the sins of the souls of Egypt that had been thrown into the underworld for thousands of years burst forth. The hearts of countless sinners that had been devoured by Adam beat wildly, providing him with endless divine power. At this moment, the power of these sinful souls turned into endless curses. Accompanied by the radiance of Adam, it stabbed out with an unimaginable strike. The power of this strike was unparalleled. In terms of quantity, it had accumulated the wrath of the sinful souls that Anubis had accumulated for thousands of years. The resentment of the sinners whose hearts had been devoured by Adam had instead turned into his power. Together with the priesthood of judgment, he locked onto Imidon as his enemy and judged his soul. The ingenuity of divine power lay in its extraordinary qualities. Meanwhile, Anubis's divine power manifested through the divine order of judgment, which was directed at Imidon's soul, transcending the material realm of judgment. If Chun-Ong were to analyze it, it would be a karmic strike that gathered the power of information interference. For Anubis, it was an extraordinary divine power. However, to Chun-Ong, it perfectly embodied the essence of divine power and information interference. The souls of mortals were the same as divine power, possessing the power to disturb information. Anubis used the souls of sinners that he had accumulated for thousands of years as the source of information disturbance. Through the information interference method of divine power, he launched a karmic attack on Imidon. This kind of causality weapon naturally had the ability to alter reality. As for the causality weapon used by Anubis's judgment clone, it was nothing more than an attack with the concepts of judgment, soul, and sin. Its effect was nothing more than to judge the sins of Imidon's soul and obtain the right to judge and control his soul. The karmic target was the concept of judgment between sin and punishment. In the face of such an attack based on the essence of divinity, any resistance that did not possess extraordinary divine power, in other words, information manipulation, was futile. Imhotep's own soul was not a blank piece of paper. It was pure and flawless. In fact, regardless of whether it was the evil act of killing the pharaoh or cursing Cairo, they were all unforgivable crimes in ancient Egypt. If sinners were ranked, then Imhotep's soul should be the most heinous. In the face of such a direct attack on karma, he could not resist at all. But as the high priest of Anubis, how could Imidon not understand this? The sins of mortals are judged by you. Then who will judge your sins? One of Imidon's trump cards was finally used. Sekhet, densely shroud of original sin, faced Anubis's soul judgment directly. Beneath his billowing black robes was a remnant of a body whose rotten bones had been completely corroded. He faced the monster Amt that Anubis had turned into, his eyes showing extreme hatred and enmity as he unleashed a roar that had been suppressed for 2,500 years at the gods with the most resolute will. If the basis of Monster Amter's information interference was judgment, then the essence of Sekhet, the unfilial child of God who was born with the black shroud of information interference, was sin, and sin was the basis of judgment. Through the shroud of original sin, Sekhet briefly carried Imhotep's sin onto his own body, and then faced Monster Amter's judgment. Unlike other attacks on information, as the essence and important characteristic of divine power, concepts, rituals, and symbolism were very important. To take an example of information attacks in low-latitude worlds for humans, if the network was a universe, IDs would be the icebergs that the gods revealed above the surface of the sea. The gods were the humans behind the network, and the essence that they revealed to the world was their IDs. Extraordinary divine power was like two hackers attacking each other. They used the essence of the world they understood to attack the enemy on the information plane, and the essence was information interference and disturbance. In that process, information itself was of great significance, with rules like various protocols and network rules, while rituals, symbols, and concepts were equivalent to the information flow sent out by IDs. Those information flow used rules to interfere with the enemy's information. At present, ID Anubis was using AMT the chicken to unleash the judgment virus on ID Imidon, directly retrieving information from the soul databank to destroy and disturb it. The loophole it used was the SYN loophole in the soul databank, and the user ID Secret Densely Shroud was proficient in the SYN loophole that led to the soul databank. He had locked down ID Imidon's SYN loophole, and changed the way the virus invaded ID Anubis's SYN loophole. However, Anubis had the perfect firewall known as divinity and his identity as a divine network administrator, which made the attack ineffective. That was why he boasted shamelessly, "How can a mortal judge the gods?" Anubis's voice was cold and emotionless. The Internet super administrator Chenong, the ultimate authority holder, was observing and recording everything that happened on this local network, while the local network's LAN administrator, the Lord, was observing and recording everything that happened. The super administrator Chen Ang's ID Chenong, Professor Chen, was using the imaginary space Borel conversion protocol to hide his own data, ready to log into the address mansion of the dead at any time. To others, including Imidon, this was a solemn god-slaying war, a rebellion against fate. However, in the eyes of Chenong, it was nothing more than an information battle between the ID Imidon, who was in the process of obtaining administrator rights, and the ID Sekimibu, ID Minis, ID Kasaikamwe, as well as the external virus Shin Tu-gong, who was controlled by the LAN administrator, the Lord, to obtain administrator rights for the ID Anubis. Their opponent was the ID Anubis, a veteran administrator. However, the ID Anubis was nothing more than an account of the Anubis behind the computer. Even if Imidon succeeded in deactivating it and obtained the administrator's identity, it might take some time for Anubis to recover the account, but the Anubis outside the network would not be harmed in any way. This was the dimensional barrier. The so-called struggle for fate of Imidon and the others was just an attempt to deactivate an account. Of course, Anubis would disappear, but the existence that was controlling Anubis would only temporarily leave this world. It could even come back at any time, restore the account, or register a new account. The true control would always be in the hands of those higher dimensional existences. Either the higher-level administrator, the Lord, would block the IP of Anubis, or the super administrator, Chenong, would kill the owner of the Anubis account in the real world above the network. The veil was lifted, and the truth of the world revealed a deathly pale coldness. When the ID Sekimibu fog of original sin, soul database, was blocked by the sinful loophole, the ID Minis, Eye of Infinity, used the information deletion tool to attack the ID Anubis's database. However, the low-level information deletion tool could only delete part of the information when the ID Minis had Level 2 administrator rights, and throw it into the virtual space trash can.